This video is sponsored by KnucklesOX, as well as Obito, who requested this topic. If you'd like to directly support my content, as well as catch it early, have your name credited as a sponsor, or maybe even your what if ideas produced as commissions, consider visiting stuff like my Patreon found in the description below. If Naruto learned the clone training trick early, it's such an incredibly interesting question, and while I do commonly say that in my videos, I more sternly mean it here, since this is one of those deceptively simple questions that once you really get into it, threatens to kinda almost unravel the entire Naruto timeline as we know it. By that I mean, in the simplest terms of asking the question what if, it's a change that could have a profoundly different impact on the story, and would most certainly deviate from Kishimoto's intentions at some point or another. It's also a question that, like most other what if questions, could be answered in multiple routes, from the extremely cold-cut and hard-line logical approach to try and approximate something close to the creator's intent, being one end of the spectrum, and the more free-form fanfiction route one could take where a change like this would likely be lost in the ways the initial ripple is meant to create, since it also happens to be one of those concepts to me that is more interesting in a kind of power play OP D&D sense, or more power scaling lens, than the idea of telling an actual story. Despite that, Naruto utilizing this trick early in the story is something I think most fans think of when this concept is introduced in Naruto and Kakashi's training during the Immortal Devastators arc, hence why it exactly may be a small or even larger plot point that gets covered so often in such a wide range of Naruto fan works, fan manga, comics, fanfic, and what ifs as well, and usually at varying levels of depth and complexity or wildness of headcanon and creativity. The thing is, to my knowledge, there isn't a lot of stuff that delves into just how expansive this could end up being, as in my opinion, not even needing to learn the Rasengan really, and just with mastery of shadow clones, transformation jutsu, and maybe a bit of understanding of wind chakra, Naruto could have progressed into a character with a fighting style that was still extremely expressive of his character and philosophy, as well as the progression of both, visually and mechanically interesting on both manga panels and in animation, and most importantly, unique and creative using the power system of the verse in order to help him avoid the boring MC power set trope. But first, it's important to remind everyone of the basics of the clone training trick trope before we get into this, as back in the days of Boruto's dad having his own story, not long after the time skip in the beginning of the Shippuden era, Naruto returned from his 2.5-year time skip of training with Jiraiya to resume his pursuit of Sasuke, eventually establish a stable retaliation against the efforts of the Akatsuki, and complete his dream of becoming the Hokage. When we first caught back up with him, he took a Kakashi alongside Sakura and a run back of the bell test, in which he was noted by the copy ninja to be pretty impressive. And then later on, he fought against Deidara a bit. This showed off how much he'd grown literally physically, and with his Rasengan, which we all meme on, even though number one, a giant Rasengan is cool, and number two, that joke is a bit overly cynical as it glosses over the fact that most ninja couldn't even pull off a giant Rasengan, let alone a normal Rasengan chakra-wise. At least not without depleting a great deal of their own reserves or without burning through all of it in one go. And sure, this is more a feat of insane chakra reserves from both Naruto and other users who are able to get multiple attacks out of it in one go, or at least, one long rest or so. But it should just be stressed and noted a lot more often that this kind of chakra cost does entail that the jutsu itself would qualify as an ultimate technique for a lot of other shinobi in the series. For example, your Rukas and your Ebisus. Those are the kind of shinobis who it would really benefit to put the training no matter how many years or decades it would take to try and learn the Rasengan, just because the benefits would be that worth it. And the idea of those guys reaching a point of being able to increase the size of Rasengan even just a little bit, let alone a giant size one, would already probably put them in the upper echelons of what their full potentials likely are, as it'd be a major boon for their attack potency, chakra control, and battle experience in general. Since these are ninja, they really only care about landing that one decisive blow, and if that's the most devastating one they can manage, then it's worth it. Ignore the fact that it's swirly blue magic stuff. And this idea is another topic we'll return to talking about a bit later. Aside from his raw power, Naruto's basics and his fundamental skills had also increased pretty drastically. He had basically begun to invent his own form of taijutsu and movement that relied on his shadow clone mastery, which also grew alongside his chakra control. And that scrappy, kinda untamed brawler part of him was still there, fueling all of it along the way. It was more like his battle instincts and IQ got more refined and sharpened to kind of increase the effectiveness of his stuff. But for the most part, it was still the Naruto we knew in terms of his kit and what he could do. The intention kinda just being Kishimoto wanted to demonstrate Naruto getting a certain level of time stronger. If this was Dragon Ball or One Piece, we'd be talking something like 10 or 100 times the ninja he was when we last saw him. It was just kind of hard to demonstrate that by him being stronger, taller, louder, and having a bigger Rasengan. So aside from his resolve and maybe his endurance, a lot of his skills and stats, so to speak, don't really get highlighted as well as they should have. But if he, for example, with this amount of power went back in time and tried the Sasuke retrieval arc again, there's really little little doubt in my mind that he would complete the mission pretty much flawlessly, especially with his backup, both the other members of his team and the fact that we're not even talking about anything involving the Nine Tails at this point, or summoning, which in retrospect Naruto himself likely would have employed. At the same time, that's really not saying all too much, as putting the Shippuden versions of any of those characters back in their places when they were doing the Sasuke Retrieve arc, they no doubt also would have done a lot better than in canon, and because of that, the arc also could have gone easier and ended in a victory for the heroes. Like if Kiba just instantly tears Sakon and Ukon apart and they just keep moving and never lose him as a team member, then the next member of the Sound 5 has to deal with maybe 2 opponents and they get beaten earlier, and then it keeps rolling on like that until just everyone's sitting there like, hey Sasuke, come on back buddy, or you're gonna get jumped and then we're gonna bring you back anyway. Speaking of Sasuke, he's really the reason that Naruto's post-time skip power doesn't really get all that much reverence, since all these factors that we've talked about so far proved to not be enough during the first reunion of Team 7, as Sasuke's training was simply more beneficial from a myriad of reasons, like the fact that he was trained with the only Sannin stronger than Jiraiya. He had fairly top-notch facilities to train in with access to pretty much whatever he wanted, be it high-grade shinobi steroids, medical ninjutsu, or sparring partners, with this all being on top of the fact that he is an Uchiha with an extremely ambitious goal, and that alone is enough to make a shinobi pretty damn strong. So we often focus on how impressive Sasuke's growth was, as he arguably took himself from maybe mid to high Chunin or maybe low to mid Jonin level to low to mid Kage level in less than 3 years. And he did it by kind of pushing and stressing himself harder while using a better means for his training, truly mastering his newly acquired lightning chakra nature to the point of evolving an A-rank jutsu made by Kakashi to have multiple variants, while also improving his natural affinity to fire to an even greater level of refinement of his already built-in harmony and strength in the element from his hot Uchiha blood, granting extra efficiency pretty much. However, it really shouldn't be disregarded that Naruto himself by this point was also likely nearing an elite Jonin to low Kage level on account of this version of him certainly being comparable to characters like Zabuza or pre-timeskip Kakashi, and he was most certainly mid to high Kage level and using as much of Kuroma's power as he could manage at this point. Again, the key issues are mostly that in comparison to all Orochimaru had to offer and provide, and the fact that there were just some stark ethical differences that also factored into the efficacy of the training from the Sannin, Sasuke just comes out on top here, which makes Naruto's growth feel less significant than it actually was. However, I would offer it was just as balanced and well-rounded in its results, at least a bit. This shrinking of the distance between rivals is thus followed up on the B-plot of the Immortal Devastators arc, and or the prelude to it if you go by the anime. After this first class since their fight at the Valley of the End, Kakashi proposes that Naruto could possibly close the gap completely and surpass Sasuke with his own signature / custom ultimate ninjutsu, and the method of achieving this was a concept devised by Kakashi, which could realistically only work for Naruto, which is of course the clone training trick or method or what have you. Essentially, because Naruto had always used his shadow clones for more direct combat rather than any kind of stealth, sabotage, intel, or scouting work, he had never fully grasped the other function of the jutsu as a means to log information and experiences, since after they are dispersed, anything a shadow clone learns is logged by the user, as they are connected to their own chakra through both their physical bodies and their spirits or soul, which we also know is an actual metaphysical reality in the world of Naruto. Obviously, physical developments cannot be accomplished through the clones, since otherwise any injuries they took on will also be reflected onto the user. But that said, things like muscle memory and instinct can be developed by them, since that's all elemental, and the cost is just what you spend in chakra to create a shadow clone, as well as the strain of loading and logging all the information at once, since it taxes the brain like it would any kind of non-flesh computer. Since via genjutsu, we also know that chakra can interact with the brain in some very interesting and also devastating ways. And this is kind of the key point, because this means this training method also has another danger aside from just regular chakra exhaustion. There is a real risk that you log so much information that you pretty much just turn what's between your ears into a microwave. However, that's never really all that explored, since using the clone training trick, Naruto was able to essentially multiply his experience gains while minimizing the training he had to actually go through to earn it. This allowed him to vastly increase his chakra control and even further refine it, since the Rasengan teaches a near perfect mastery of changing chakra form already. It also allowed Naruto to master his natural chakra nature affinity of wind in an impressive time of less than a week or 2. In fact, I think in comparison to the Rasengan, which took 7 days to learn, this took like 2 days maybe. A task which via Sasuke's feats as a genius we could assume at best would take a talented shinobi with multiple factors aiding their growth at least 2.5 years years or so. He then went on to use this experience in a step-by-step process to complete the Rasengan as it was originally intended to be by the 4th Hokage, learning how to add chakra natures to the raw ball of spiraling chakra to achieve extra power and a secondary effect, aside from it just being a devastating attack. Also around this time in the anime through filler, Naruto spends some extra time learning to perform collaborative ninjutsu with the Toads, alongside the one he practiced with Captain Yamato, using a basic wind-style Rasengan, which was pretty advantageous experience for him. We never really get to see Naruto learn a basic elemental ninjutsu, since that would help us know the time frame that task for Naruto specifically as well takes. And even though if you've seen any of my or anyone else's what ifs or fanfics, there are multitudes of elemental ninjutsu that could have fit Naruto and may have been very useful to him in his earlier adventures. And he would go on to later snag a few by the time his greater hero's journey was kind of wrapping up. But the Shadow Clone training method would work for accelerating the learning of other kinds of ninjutsu as well. And to boot, the vast majority of elemental ninjutsu never really exceed the A rank. While in contrast, mastering and completing the Rasengan and then using all the variations you could do with it are pretty easily S+ rank as a difficult. So it's also well within Naruto's wheelhouse by, say, the Search for Tsunade arc. So even though we don't canonically know a standard time frame to learn most regular elemental jutsu, fanon and headcanon can always come into play for an estimate, since there's things like Naruto 5e, for example, you could reference for the time it would take to do such a thing. Since many of the rulings they have for these features of the verse I do agree with, because they are meant to balance difficulty, investment, struggle, and progression in a similar way to most narratives, and it's made as a homebrew tabletop gaming system by fans of Naruto who want to capture that feel of the series accurately. Both the cool uplifting power fantasy part of it and the gritty, realistic, horrifying ninjas at war parts of it. For example, as you would assume and as is shown by the series, things like having a master/teacher of some form or another to instruct you drastically increases the downtime/training needed to learn something new versus trying to do so self-taught, which also assumes the learner knows and then has some reference for what they actually want to learn. For example, if Sasuke for some reason did not know he was trying to learn the fireball jutsu or just kind of feeling it out naturally, then his self-taught time frame to learn the jutsu will be a lot larger. Or consider the ruling of there being an inability for a ninja to learn techniques that are more than one rank above what they are normally capable of. Or rather, if it is not an inability, then it is an extreme difficulty. So say if you have only so far learned E or D rank jutsu, like the most basic chakra enhancements of the body or regular clone and transformation jutsus, you'd most likely only be a D rank ninja. Thus, the best you could hope to achieve realistically at that level currently would be to learn a C rank jutsu, regardless of if you have a great master and a whole bunch of downtime, because a B rank would presumably be both too high in chakra cost and the amount of control needed to actually cast it. Thus, even if you did learn it, it would be pretty much useless to you. And because you would be attempting something that you're truly not ready for, the required amount of time out of combat to put your full concentration and focus on the task of mastering it would also likely increase. Hence the need for it to be done during specified training and downtime rather than through sheer force of will or adaptation in the midst of combat, since that's usually what you want to save for your really big moments in the narrative. For example, Naruto landing that first Rasengan against Kabuto. As Naruto D&D rules it, to learn a new jutsu, E rank costs 2 total hours when self-taught and 1 with the master. D rank costs 3 hours self-taught and 2 with the master. C rank is a ramp up in difficulty, costing 6 hours self-taught and 4 with the master. B rank is 12 hours self-taught and 8 with the master. A rank is 20 hours self-taught and 16 with the master. And S is 40 hours self-taught and 24 with the master. I believe these time frames also apply to learning things that aren't classically ninjutsu, and they are only accounting for what it takes to actually learn the jutsu, not what it takes to attain full mastery and proficiency with it. It also doesn't account for the fact that many ninjutsu and techniques build off the use of other ones you may have to learn. So even though it doesn't say it on the label, to learn the fireball jutsu, you may first need to learn the long chakra enhancement jutsu, which adds on to your fireball training, as would learning a change in nature or form likely. By the way, attentive fans of Kenshi 618's Better Left Unsaid fanfic will likely realize that a long chakra enhancement jutsu is an actual concept that has been thought up by fans before, as by the virtue of that story focusing a bit more on Asuma Sarutobi being a sensei of Naruto in that timeline, there are discussions about the fact that Asuma would later negatively influence Naruto to pick up the bad habit of smoking. However, he kind of defends himself with this by making the argument that he doesn't actually smoke really and truly, or at least doesn't let any of the effects of it enter his body, since he uses a kind of wind style lung chakra enhancement jutsu, using it it to basically eviscerate and super filter out all the actually harmful parts of cigarettes, while Naruto would be avoiding all the harmful aspects via his passive Jinchuriki healing. Beyond all this, when it comes to the D&D lens of what it takes to learn a new jutsu, it is also just a total summation of hours needed towards the discipline, kinda like a college credit system. So it's not exactly that you're putting in every hour in one sitting, but it does mean the objective of actually learning it won't officially be done until the hours have been completed. And on a kind of macro scale, because D&D is meant to be a sort of power fantasy where you are a bit better than the average Joe, you could really hit all those time frames both with master and self-taught with a time 10s multiplier, so that under regular circumstances, or just, if you're talking about how it was in the academy or something like that, it's a bit closer to 20 to 10 hours to learn an E-rank jutsu, since that would also make a lot of sense for trying to teach kids the little stuff. As child ninja soldier or not, they are still children, and attention spans and their actual endurance at that age would still come into play. Should also be mentioned that this system doesn't account for any possible roadblocks or interruptions, setbacks, or just basic needs other than training, like the fact that even ninja will still need to eat, sleep, and poop at some point. Their master will have to as well at some point, so they won't even always be able to chip away at the hours with that doubled rate. All in all, it is not a bad base to run off though, since with different factors you could approach it differently. Is the jutsu being made completely from scratch? Then a master may not be as helpful, and the time frame may be longer as there isn't much reference to go on. This illustration should also show why clone training and the idea of cutting down on the time it takes to accomplish the goal of said training is so extremely impressive and significant in this world, just as a feat of pretty stark dedication and hard work as well as skill, since even without access to the Kekkei Genkai, Jinchuriki abilities, and clan techniques that offer all kinds of crazy meta-breaking hacks in the world of Naruto, training and effort do pay off if you have the time to apply and the luck to not die before you grow from the experience of harsh battles. In fact, to illustrate further how far the trick could have been pushed in just its debut, if all it takes for Naruto is 2 free days for training, the spare time and chakra to upcast Shadow Clone Jutsu several hundred times over, and most importantly, knowledge of effective training methods that can be gradually upscaled to different elements like the leap cutting method could be, that would mean Naruto could more than likely learn the other 4 base natures in a similar time frame. Even if he didn't do that and simply chose to further sharpen his wind mastery in the same way Sasuke and the Uchiha seem to push their nature release jutsu beyond the bounds of what most ninja usually think possible, especially when it's fire style, or in Sasuke's case, even his lightning style, Naruto likely could have achieved that same level of chakra nature mastery in a few days as well. Actually, he kinda did just by the virtue of the Rasen Shuriken being an S-rank wind style ninjutsu, which would therefore make future endeavors with wind release even easier thanks to that greater affinity, as I could see him just straight up making a purely wind style counter jutsu to Sasuke's Kirin that half uses naturally occurring forces and half nature transformed chakra to pull off a powerful S-rank jutsu, kinda in that way where the Kirin feels like a Sage Art even though it's not an actual Sage Art. Imagine something like a Tengu, where Naruto manipulates a storm with wind chakra into making a giant wind chakra construct of a Tengu to attack his opponents. That feels fitting. Naruto trains with Jiraiya and basically took his original ninja ID photo in kabuki makeup. I don't think I can stress to you how much he'd enjoy making a huge wind Tengu or wind Oni to blow his opponents away. And I personally would love a double page spread of an attack like that clashing with and canceling out with Sasuke's Kirin. Or if Naruto would have some form of disadvantage or unfamiliarity with any nature that wasn't his base wind affinity, that would as a result make them harder to learn and less powerful, we can just assume it would take double or higher the cost of what it took Naruto to master wind release, which he is again capable of, and that likely wouldn't even be that hard since we do see Naruto strains chakra reserves during this training, which is usually a rarity for him, but it's also something we know can lead to the growth of the chakra reserves themselves. So say if he had to use double or triple the effort to learn fire release, which is his natural weakness, and outline an avatar struggling with the element opposite theirs in the reincarnation cycle, then even if he attained no or even middling results, he'd still likely end up increasing his chakra reserves in the pursuit of it. And the other training methods could probably be done in the same way as the leaf cutting method, since that was essentially just asking Naruto to do to an object of increasing size, durability, and complexity what the chakra nature test paper naturally does when it absorbs people's chakra. And in the case of those with wind, it splits itself down the middle, since the focus of wind release jutsu are usually powerful or critical hits like slashes and big bursts of pressurized air, whereas fire nature causes the paper to burn, and the jutsu of that release usually focus on devastating firepower and lingering damage. as well as sometimes forming a lot of constructs or traps meant to burn and disable. The stages of training methods for it could be something like first burning a leaf, or controlling a flame, or possibly just the heat of something affecting the body. Then you could honestly ramp up to something like walking across burning coals, as that'd be a good one since you could develop fire chakra mastery by using the chakra walking technique to try and regulate the temperature into something safe to walk on. And finally, you could do something like condensing a massive blazing fire into a more contained yet very dense and still powerful flame, like plopping a student down into the middle of a forest fire and saying, "I want this contained small enough for camp later." And all that said, if by doing things like this, Naruto could learn all 5 base chakra natures, with a teacher like Kakashi, he also could have learned any jutsu Kakashi was willing to teach him during that time, including the Chidori, even though it might be a bit useless to him, as it could be used with the Rasengan, or even just for Kakashi's will to be further inherited by his student, with it becoming a completed lightning style Rasengan. And still just remaining on the topic of the clone training method's effects on changes in chakra form and nature, as well as increased control and how good you could get at it, Naruto could also probably learn to implement this with his taijutsu and shadow clone techniques, since again the muscle memory of, say, the kata from taijutsu scrolls could be logged by a clone, as could the feeling and method of infusing your chakra nature into a punch, or coating your body in a cursed energy style to try and pull off different effects, like chakra modes, armors, or special types of attacks that you can't pull off any other way. You can also do lots of simple stuff, like learning, mastering, and evolving new basic skills, or polishing his already acquired branches on the skill tree into mastery, like learning to perform a single-handed Rasengan early, as if he gains that kind of chakra control, it would then simplify his original process to create the Rasengan plus elemental release fusion jutsu, allowing him to either not waste chakra by focusing on only one clone, or to now assign that freed up clone to a different task. This alone could open Naruto up to more variations of attacks and techniques, the way Sasuke constantly experimented with and changed the form of his chakra when using the Chidori. Imagine a wind-style Rasen shield. I know Konohamaru recently showed off a concept like this derived from Rasengan, with his wind-style Rasen barricade/berry. However, that's more performed by dispersing a Rasengan with wind chakra to make a strong obstruction of air, which impressively was able to block a Chidori launched by Hidari, a divine tree person derived from Sasuke. But what I'm thinking is something of a higher rank, and that's made almost as a direct homage to the Hyuga rotation technique, which Naruto got close and personal experience when the technique was performed by a generational genius of the clan on him. The only drawback really being that it would have a backlash or recoil of some kind to use it, and he wouldn't have the extra sensory abilities of the Yakugan to use rotation to its full effect, at least until he gets to Sage Mode, and until that point he could just use the lower rank shield jutsu that Konohamaru used. But once Sage Mode is attained, which in this context would also of course be done easier, both the prior mentioned issues would be negated. In fact, the jutsu would probably be flat out stronger than a fully mastered rotation by that point, with a higher chance to critically wound with blowback or even eviscerate a foe like a master Rasengan performed like a fighting game parry that emanates from the body or palm in an instant. And while we're at it, let's also discuss a Rasen kunai that could differ from the shuriken, as that it focuses more on punching a precise point in an opponent's guard or shield, something that amplifies the destructive and penetrating power of the Rasengan into more of a drill or cone-like shape at the cost of Naruto needing to wield it and release the technique in melee range like the original Rasen Shuriken was before Sage Mode, since that would now represent a range form of Rasengan in this concept. The main difference would be that instead of the poison-like effect of the Shuriken, all the damage and energy of the attack would be focused into one singular point, because sometimes Naruto just wants to haul off and throw a haymaker. This Rasen kunai technique could also maybe be performed while wielding an actual kunai, alongside a more exaggerated change in the chakra's form, which could extend its range and give Naruto a way of nullifying Sasuke's Chidori enhanced Kenjutsu techniques, or just threatening his enemies with something similar. Since this technique probably wouldn't be all too different from the original Rasen Shuriken post-Sage Mode unless you really tried to give it something like that, I would make the post-Sage Mode buff of the Rasen kunai be that after landing this attack, Naruto can pump more chakra in for a kind of meter burn that further condenses the Rasen kunai's piercing force into a beam, able to hit enemies behind one another. Or you can make it extremely effective at breaking through defensive techniques like barrier ninjutsu and perimeter sealing jutsu. And on top of these ideas of different changes in Rasengan form, none of this even scratches the surface of the widely interesting topic of the secondary effects of the different nature releases you could mix into the Rasengan, alongside its variants, as it's arguably kind of the potential man of ninjutsu, due to its versatility and its nature is pretty much raw weaponized chalk. You could sit around hypothesizing for hours about possible combos and effects, and I just mean with the basic natures, not even the other Kekkei Genkai ones that he could later use when he got the Sage of 6 pass mode. But just for a short idea of what I mean, consider a lightning style Rasen barrier that simultaneously nullifies an opponent's attack, blows them back, and leaves them paralyzed, or an earth style Rasen kunai that allows Naruto to burrow and drill through the ground at high speeds, letting him maneuver or land a devastating and heavy surprise attack with his ultimate move, much like the digging uppercut he used to defeat Neji. We're a good ways into the script so far, and somehow I've only really discussed how broken early clone training would make Naruto in the realm of elemental release alone for the most part, with no major mention of things like sealing jutsu or anything else he could spend time and effort getting rather good at. This should also go to show why you really can't even give Naruto access to clone training too early in a story before, say, the time skip maybe, since it would make a great deal of his challenges easier by improving the gains from his training, or even just giving him extra battle experience by trying to experiment more through his clones when spamming them. Hell, Iruka once estimated that Naruto could go from getting to Jonin in 2 years, since that's how long the study of theory and elemental release would probably take anyway, but with this, he could legitimately do it in days or weeks, which would make his actual official shinobi rank even more useless than it already kinda is. Essentially, the clone training method from Naruto may be one of the most easily exploited training methods in fiction outside of ones like time-dilated training, since it's essentially the same thing, just done in a different process. Actually, one of the only other ones that really stacks up to it in my opinion is also from the Naruto verse, since we've recently learned of a new method of training from Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex called the Prescience method, which involves the perception of and learning from alternate timelines and versions of yourselves, which may have advanced further beyond you to learn certain skills. It's also literally derived from something called a shunjutsu, which basically just means a god technique, but we've already seen it to be an extremely effective method of training. Not to mention, just imagine mixing the Prescience method with high-level shadow clone training, the way Boruto presumably was probably able to do at least somewhat thanks to his own access to shadow clones and his full understanding of how they work. Hence another reason why the massive jump in strength he makes over his own time skip. This should also go to show why I think Kishimoto made sure not to abuse clone training, since really, in the grand scheme of things, even a bit more of it than Naruto pulled off in canon would quickly become overkill, as he'd pretty easily just be the strongest guy in the room in most situations until he met Madara. Maybe. And that's if the bad guys got that far, since as Kakashi said, this training method could only really work this wildly broken way for Naruto or someone with similar circumstances. So it's not even really one of those situations where the bad guys could even try to beat you at your own game. It's also just partly why shadow clones are such a desirable ability, both in-verse and IRL, since with them they would allow people to live more of their lives without the very human fear of missing out bogging you down constantly, and that alone is massively useful even outside of sick-ass ninja shit. Some people would just love to be able to make a maximum of 2 clones and that's it. You send one to work and maybe pull some overtime, you'd leave one at home and maybe catch up on the endless backlog of reading, gaming, and whatever other projects all people have in their minds to work on and complete someday but so rarely have the time for. While the real you would be free to have a lazy day, go to the gym, or on a trip whenever you want really. I think after seeing as much media as we have about clones, fewer people would be likely to want to have a whole bunch of themselves running around out there to the point of things getting complicated, but that may just be me. However, this video is growing quite long, but at the same time I was commissioned for the video with the key request that I, quote, yap to the point of insanity, unquote. So before we sign off, I'm actually going to be calling this video the prelude for this now miniseries. With that prelude now done, as we've established what exactly the clone training method is and how effective it could be if it were utilized early in the series and at a greater frequency. So in the next installments, yes, we are going to explore different routes the canon story of Naruto could have taken as a result of earlier use of clone training. Though to keep things interesting and to avoid repeating myself too much, as I've already pretty much gussed about what Naruto could get from this, I want to frame these routes both based on how early exactly he gets access to these training tricks, as well as the impacts this could have had on the other main members of Team 7 and Sakura, Sasuke, and Kakashi. So essentially, this miniseries will answer not only what would happen if Naruto got earlier access to clone training, but also if all of Team 7 made use of it to some varying degrees, and the theory crafting and technique building we can derive from that topic. And I'm so excited that I'm probably going to go ahead and just start on the next part now. Last time we delved into the most surface level aspects of the question of what if Naruto learned the shadow clone training trick early, and now it's time for the next layer of discussion it will take to fully explore this concept. The response to part 1 was interesting, I'd say, for a myriad of reasons. Number 1 being the topic itself just got much more interest than I expected it to, so once again, thank you so much for giving my content your valuable views and time. Number 2, part 1 sparked some interesting to mildly funny feedback due to things like misunderstandings, or even some blatantly incorrect understandings or even headcanons about the world of Naruto and its lore, or disappointment in how I decided to approach the what if itself. Though number 3 was probably the most of note development from the first part on account of how hard it seemed to be to convey something to many of you, since I got a lot of comments along the lines of, this is not a what if. I'm not going to spend an inordinate amount of time on this to rub you guys' own nose and your piss on the carpet, but I do want to stress to each of you who decided to make this argument, you are not only incorrect, you do not understand what a what if is fundamentally if you think they can only be presented or done in one way. Thus, this is a what if. Beyond that, for this concept for a what if tale specifically, there genuinely just is not enough meat on the bone of the story to even investigate it as a narrative versus as an overview. I literally began the first installment by recognizing something very true. A what if can be both a more overtly creative and involved narrative that borders on the lines of fan fiction, one where things like characters, emotions, bonds, and specific dialogue are considered and conveyed to meticulous detail to explain creative flourishes or extremely high concepts that weren't originally found or deeply explored in the source material. And by the way, as I always say, the line between a what if and fan fiction for me is usually on the constraints the writer places on themselves and whether or not they decide to limit themselves as reasonably as they can with the same constraints the original creator had when they were making it. On the other end of the spectrum, however, a what if can also be a strictly factual overview and discussion about the fallout of a proposed hypothetical. There are just as, if not more, in fact flat out there are more, videos on this platform specifically done in the latter format than the former, a great deal of which don't even revolve around fiction or like anime and stuff like that, since the act of discussing and considering hypotheticals is generally just a part of human nature and consciousness. In your day-to-day life, your mind just kind of constantly, whether consciously or subconsciously, considers different routes and timelines as a consequence of your actions and those of others around you. And when engaging in these, the act of trying to give narrative to the hypothetical becomes counterproductive, as you can't 100% assure that that narrative is going to be accurate all the time. Regardless though, both of these approaches count as what ifs, and if you need more convincing by this point, I feel egotistical and pretentious enough to claim at least some authority in the art form of what-ifery, and thus, yes, I feel my opinion on the subject is more valid than the average enjoyer of what-if content. And I feel strong enough in that position to point out that other creators I like that might do more so power scaling content, such as like Swag Kage or 6, have also done what ifs of that overview type before, where they have not really narrativized them. However, I still fully count these as what ifs and view the idea that they aren't really silly. And for that matter, a great deal of my contemporaries who also produce what if content also don't really dig into the narratives, mindsets, or perspectives of their stories to anywhere near the degree that I do all the time, but nevertheless, they're still making what ifs. That, and by the way, that idea of not being able to assure 100% accuracy of the what if is still true of the overview style as well. They are both equally valid and can be used at different times to different effectiveness, and it's pretty much up to the creator to discern when and where that is. The key difference in tell being that the story needs to have an interesting draw that justifies narrativization. For example, if a what if is literally just about a character growing exponentially and being unable to be threatened or challenged, giving it a narrative only serves to really waste time. Some stakes and interest and even comedy can be derived from situations like this, but even then, it's to varying degrees and it still depends on the concept. Since that said, I'm aware some people enjoy these kinds of stories where characters can only be described as overpowered and there aren't really a lot of things that truly challenge them, but that's just what you're drawn there for the story for. But that's not really the kind of content I make or like writing for one thing, and for another, this story wasn't even well suited for that. Since it doesn't just result in a single overpowered character that kind of messes with the story, it results in a god entering the machine, something you usually want to avoid at all costs when writing anything for the most part. Even the person who commissioned the video series originally recognized in their prompt to me that the story would not be very interesting as a narrative, especially from my style, because you just essentially couldn't have stakes that weren't wholly manufactured and shallow. Thus, a discussion style video was much more desirable for them. And to that extent, it's still completely possible to get me to do this in a narrative style. I would just maintain the position that I don't think is well suited for it. This is what I mean by it seemed to be hard to convey things to people. I don't think a lot of you grasp how wildly broken and ill-fitted for a story this concept really was. That's what this part in the video series is going to be meant to try and hammer in. And it's also why this video will focus a bit more on someone else using Shadow Clone training simply as best as they can, rather than Naruto himself, since that at least is more interesting than continuously gushing about how cool and strong Naruto could get. That's because this route could be the most broken one if you allow it to be, since it's the one where Naruto remembers the full uses of Shadow Clones when he first reads the jutsu from the Forbidden Scroll of Seals. So obviously, this one could also easily break the story in a myriad of ways, because number one, Naruto could just master Shadow Doppelganger technique and then just send clones off with the scroll to do literally whatever he wanted with it for a little while longer, and that's all he would need. Be it reading further on and learning more, or even copying the contents of the scroll down so he can return it but still basically start the story with a boatload of forbidden jutsu and techniques he'd likely only know the theory of, but would simultaneously have all the leisure time he wanted to learn to perform them and a training method to drastically reduce the time it took to master them. By the way, that in my eyes is a more interesting setup for the prompt if you want to approach a narrative, as it essentially turns Naruto into something like a Togepi from Pokemon when they use the move Metronome, and random select and use a move even if they normally can't, which I love. Taking Naruto in that route of a wild magic sorcerer is at least a way to make him being overpowered more engaging in my eyes, since it wouldn't be so consistent for one thing. The only real limits of that setup being the number of jutsu we canonically know are in the Scroll of Seals really. But I'm still not even talking about that. Just as I said the first time, not only could Naruto with this setup break the entire story while using no other forbidden jutsu, but Sakura, the character so commonly looked down on and spit on by some members of the fanbase as useless and weak, could rather easily do so as well. Let's explore, shall we? The story beyond the learning of the Shadow Clone would likely stick close to canon past the Bell test, leading up to the first act of the Land of Waves arc. I think since Naruto and Team 7 do no real on-screen training during this time, only D-rank missions which serve as a form of training on how to operate as a Genin ninja / how to operate as a team rather than actual combat training, nothing of note really changes. By the time we reach the appearance of Zabuza and Haku, however, this Naruto would already be set to change the course of the story going forward completely, since he would essentially be the creator of the Shadow Clone training method in this verse just by knowing how it works and knowing how many clones he can spam, which, as I've said, could affect his teammates pretty drastically. Even if we didn't go the full route of them using Shadow Clones as a main combat jutsu and training method the way Naruto employs them, this remained to be the case, and this would be discovered and exemplified during the tree walking chakra control exercise. There is actually a line during this training, as well as Ebisu's lecture to Naruto, that I think are pretty key to understanding the true path to power in the ninja world: extreme levels of chakra control. That sounds basic and anticlimactic, but it's generally extremely true. Hack's abilities like Kekkei Genkai and clan techniques are great, but ultimately, even wood release, Hashirama cells, or being a Jinchuriki is completely useless to you, if not outright counterproductive, if you lack the necessary chakra control. It's again very much like a concept covered in One Piece, where having a great devil fruit or a fine sword are great and all, but they mean absolutely nothing if your haki is too weak to keep you from being blown away into the sea or having your sword stolen or broken by a superior opponent. In fact, by Kakashi's statements, a subpar control of your chakra can literally cut the effectiveness of both your jutsu and your overall use of your chakra to enhance yourself in half. Or, if you're just too bad in general, it may just fail entirely, such as Naruto's various attempts at the regular clone genjutsu, despite it requiring far less chakra than jutsu that create physical clones through a medium. This concept also suggests that the vice versa is true though. Having chakra control above what's necessary can increase the effectiveness of your techniques by double or more. And that's not even taking into account things like your opponent's defenses to those techniques and their amped effectiveness. We even see this in action really early on in the series, with characters like the third Hokage and Orochimaru, former top dogs of the verse who used to define it through feats like the pressure and control of their chakra being so great it could affect the environment around them when they pulled it to high tension. They were also both characters very much focused on knowledge and the improvement of the basic and fundamental skills into something grander, be it through darker means like Orochimaru or the Diligent Will of Fire. For example, the third Hokage was only making a couple clones during that fight with Orochimaru, though because of his power, experience, and control, those clones themselves are likely a lot stronger than some ninja are just at their full power, being able to take on Edo Tensei versions of the second and first Hokage. So to return to our game analogies, if you're only dealing half damage against an opponent due to lacking control, and they're able to buff their natural durability over twice what it usually is due to their superior chakra control, then it results in those gaps in powers we see between the average unnamed background ninja and named characters with actual powers and abilities that we spend the time to explore. This is also why what in retrospect seems like such simple training was so effective during the Land of Waves and beyond. We often joke that tree and water walking should be in the academic curriculum, just as standard things to learn like cloning and transformation, and I still agree with that. But something could be said for a Jonin sensei placing really heavy importance on chakra control training exercises, as something not just for academy students or genin or weak ninja. Everyone should always be doing them, especially if they want to get stronger and not die in the ninja world. Another of the arguments I've so far seen commonly was pushback on my defense of Naruto's growth by some who claim things like he had no feats or such to justify the idea that he did not get notably stronger, much less the 10 times or 100 times like I was suggesting in the reference to Dragon Ball or One Piece I made. But again, just this Kakashi statement linked with his later praise of Naruto during the second Bell test means that those estimates are wholly possible factors of growth for Naruto, since we know his chakra control indeed got better. All that said, how does that make Naruto broken or much less Sakura broke it now, since I'm 10 minutes in. I mean, she mastered tree walking instantly and didn't really get much out of the training, not even a noticeable increase in her stamina or speed or anything, since she didn't have to exert herself to complete the drill and was even able to give Naruto advice. The thing is, what if that changed on account of Naruto's progress? Naruto and Sasuke were figuring out how to tree walk at around the same pace, and it ultimately didn't take them all that long in the first place to get much benefit out of the exercise in terms of increasing their control by wild amounts. But even so, by the properties of the Shadow Clone training trick, if Naruto made only a single clone to participate in the training with him, then the amount of experience he gains and the advancements he makes in his chakra control will be double that of Sasuke's, and so on with each clone made, which will ultimately stack up and matter in the long run. Beyond that, there really isn't a true limit to how acute and precise one can make their chakra control, meaning that double or more increase in the effectiveness of one's techniques has a fairly high ceiling to reach, as it's now being affected by the achievements and training of your clones and how many you make as well. Thus, there is only so many clones Naruto could make in this exercise before he would then exceed the levels of chakra control that Sakura has, as that could just be demonstrated by a single clone being able to tree walk perfectly as soon as it's made. It should also be noted that if his efficiency and effectiveness with his chakra control and ninjutsu increases at an accelerated rate, then at state with the third Hokage, his basic shadow clones will also just become outright stronger by varying degrees, which again we did begin to see in the source material over time as Naruto's individual clones became stronger and better at utilizing and controlling their own chakra segmented off to create them. They also became overall harder to kill, needing bigger and heavier blows from stronger and stronger shinobi over the course of the series to dispel them. But with a heavier focus on chakra control training earlier on through the clone method like we've been discussing, that advanced acceleration would also itself become accelerated vastly, making each individual clone and the technique itself overall more useful to Naruto over time. Put simply, it would make the Shadow Clone training method make Naruto stronger by the second. To demonstrate this more succinctly, here's an actual benchmark. Naruto before the tree walking training had to really focus on disguising a single clone as a shuriken, whereas if his control and power over both the transformation and clone jutsu were to increase, that focus and strain now becomes far less taxing, meaning he could probably now pull off a multi or even super multi upcasted version of his demon wind bomb jutsu, which alone would probably serve as an easy arc finishing move against the likes of Zabuza, Haku, and Gato's thugs, and honestly would probably continue to serve him well up until the tuning exam, since I could easily see it mix into the 2K barrage. Naruto would essentially be throwing a single enhanced clone harder and faster than Sasuke could beforehand. Then he'd surge chakra into it to multiply it so that aiming no longer matters until the third stage of the technique, where the shuriken all turn back into Naruto's, and then either throw hands or maybe throw each other, or the contents of their weapons pouches, which could include more shuriken, kunai, or even explosive tags. Not only that, but Naruto could also put a basic chakra coating enhancement on the shuriken throw to give it that classic glow of high-level ninjutsu, making the attack all the more devastating. To put that in perspective for you, with just tree walking training, we've just taken one of Naruto's first moves ever, his most basic maybe B rank shuriken technique or nin/buki jutsu, whatever you may classify it as, and we've just made it rank up to A class at the very least. Hell, we spent all that time in the first part discussing the underutilization of the elemental releases by Naruto, but applied to the demon wind bomb/multi-demon wind bomb jutsu, it could raise this hypothetical A rank jutsu for Naruto into an S rank. Like a wind style multi-demon wind bomb jutsu would obviously increase the speed, range, and cutting/blowback power of the technique, while if you learn the other releases, you could possibly achieve other effects like extreme cutting power, heavier blows by the clones, unavoidable attacks, or control of the flames if you were to utilize explosives with the technique. Go even further and get crazier with it. You could possibly make the clones themselves explosive through the highly acute control of the chakra that makes them up, such as Itachi's explosive clone technique, which could easily be partially due to some light use or understanding of the change in nature to fire release. That's what I mean by increased effectiveness of your techniques. This would make the Shadow Clone training method itself far easier for Naruto over time, which would create a snowball effect, as now each individual clone he already so easily spams is exponentially more useful to him as it would be in canon, and that's both in and out of combat. For the sake of still exploring further through Sakura, as I've been focusing on Naruto to prove my point so far, let's drift back into the narrative style of What If for a bit, and say here in this timeline, on account of how proud of herself Sakura was after this feat, I think witnessing even a hint of the kind of advancement I'm proposing for Naruto in this could actually make her open to not only training more to try to increase her chakra control even further beyond her natural talent with it, but it could also maybe even allow her to swallow her pride in order to try and learn something from Naruto, as I could see her quickly taking notice of the Shadow Clone training method and quite possibly wanting to try and implement it for herself in exchange for the advice she gives to him in this timeline, or more likely to learn how to do it so she can teach Sasuke and make him happy with her. Besides, Kakashi by this point was still dealing with chakra exhaustion, and Sasuke many a time was trying to train on his own in private. So it is also not as if Naruto and Sasuke would never have the downtime or a moment alone in order to facilitate this, since Kakashi could forbid the teaching of Shadow Clone to a non-Jinchuriki Genin, whom could put herself into chakra exhaustion if she wasn't careful with it, since it is more than likely to take half or more of her chakra to even pull off the jutsu to craft a single clone. And Sasuke on the other hand could present a social barricade to this happening, since in these early days Sakura's behavior was influenced mostly by attempts to appease and gain the attention of Sasuke, which made her originally feel like giving attention to Naruto was counterproductive for her. Beyond that, this isn't the part I want to explore Sasuke's possible relationship with clone training in just yet, because obviously if he was able to see Naruto go from pulling off their combo trick by himself to evolving into an A+ to S rank technique again by himself, he would of course train all the harder to do the same. And with this single proposed change to the timeline, the entire story is irrevocably changed forever, as you would now have a Sakura who understands the Shadow Clone Jutsu and the training method one can use with it as a Genin, and you'd also have a Naruto with a likely better understanding of how to control his chakra, and a better understanding of just how crucial and beneficial acute and precise chakra control training can be thanks to Sakura's tutelage than he originally got, making both of them overtly stronger than their canon counterparts at this time due to an overall minor bit of collaboration, since as I said, it literally only takes a single clone to double your experience gains during this training, and this is training Kakashi claimed could have made his students twice as strong if performed correctly. Thus, you now also have a Sakura who could be 4 times as strong, fast, and effective in the use of her few ninjutsu during this point as her canon counterpart had, and a Naruto who could at least be 4 times as strong, fast, and effective as his canon counterpart, if not infinitely more so. And by that measure, Sasuke as a rival is not going to sit back and be surpassed while this happens, meaning he will likely train hard to make up for things and also grow stronger than his canon counterpart, with access to the clone training trick or not. Now all of a sudden, Sakura is not only useful in terms of being a body holding a kunai you have to go through first before you can make your way to Tazuna, she's just in general more useful on the battlefield. Hell, there is actually an entire conversation dilemma for Sakura during the Land of Waves after Sasuke goes down because she is unable to go and see to his injuries and protect their client simultaneously. But if she can literally make a single Shadow Clone, that issue is now completely eliminated, meaning someone could also now perform some form of medicine check on Sasuke earlier in the bridge battle to get him back up and ready to fight again after being put in a state of fake death by Haku Senbou. Not to mention, a stronger Naruto would also just arrive at the battlefield earlier, and that he and Sasuke both would just be harder to deal with for Haku here, especially while he's holding back. The bridge battle overall just wouldn't go the same, and quite possibly would even end in the idealized way of Gato blowing his load a bit too early and revealing his plan to double-cross his assassins before they are both actually dead, which could in turn lead to Zabuza and Haku teaming up with Team 7 and the citizens of the Wave to defeat him with far less effort than in canon, ending the arc with Naruto and Team 7 having missing ninja out there in the world as dubious allies, rather than dubious inspirations to them to not be used as tools. But again, no matter what, the Land of Wave mission is now rendered an easy win, though even so, the experience gains from it are magnitudes more valuable than they were in canon. And we've yet to do anything all too drastic other than showing Sakura how to make a single Shadow Clone, and having Naruto use the clone method during the tree walking training. However, they're both arguably already the MVPs of the story. Next, of course, would come the tuning exams, which once again, each of the Team 7 Genin would perform way better in. In fact, Naruto is more impressive and likely even boasts an even better control of Kuro's chakra to throw around at this point, while Sasuke, trying to keep up with his teammates and now with his Sharingan, is also doing all the better. But what about Sakura? For the sake of argument, we'll grant their growth is likely not enough to avoid Orochimaru or Sasuke's curse mark being bestowed on him. So Sakura's next major test would come when it's time to defend her team from the Sound Ninja, which she of course would also pull off pretty admirably, since she was able to buy the required time needed in canon already while basically having nothing to defend herself or her teammates with. So a Sakura 4 times as strong may be able to do a lot more. Like for example, if she pushes herself to create 2 clones and has them transform, she could pretend to be watching over her down teammates to lure in the pursuers. Then when Dosu, Zaku, and Ken arrives, she could spring a trap on them, allow the clones to take them on, and try to escape and return to the real Naruto and Sasuke whom she hid away. A plan which is just as, if not more likely to succeed as her canon one to wait it out, and to boot, this one would not require the aid of Rock Lee or result in him taking damage against Dosu or other members of Team Guy or Team 8 needing to arrive for backup. Sasuke likely wouldn't even get a chance to use the power bestowed on him by Orochimaru, since it's highly likely he'd be waking up to Sakura explaining to him how she not only led away some of their opponents, but even got valuable intel on how all 3 of the Sound Ninja fight thanks to the data her clones collect. It however is fully possible 2 clones and 2 transformations could be enough to exhaust Sakura, making this strategy at least somewhat unviable. at least for self-preservation, though even that may wind up being a blessing later on, as surviving chakra exhaustion can increase the reserves, meaning this action would still result in the experience and spiritual/physical growth necessary for Sakura's shadow clone limit to now have a higher cap, likely meaning she could now probably make another 3 or 4 herself before really hitting her limits. Thus, even if Sakura is now too weak to operate actually in the tuning exams from here on out, she's still way stronger than her canon counterpart would be. In fact, I'd argue the hypothetical feat against the Sound team here would be worthy of advancing to tuning rank alone, even if she didn't participate in the finals. And even then, the changes would still be quite numerous, as Sasuke here wouldn't get a chance to be intoxicated by Orochimaru's power in the beginning, and thus could be easier convinced to have his curse mark suppressed and to swear off his power. And even then, this is if we accept that this lowball Sakura would be too tired to participate any further in the exams, since if she does fight Ino, this version of her would win without a shadow of a doubt, meaning she would also then earn herself a month of training under a ninja with some form of expertise or a specialty which Kakashi feels could benefit her, and she could do it while still having access to a watered down version of the shadow clone training method that isn't even really that watered down in the grand scheme of things. Note that Kakashi only really said the shadow clone training method could only work for Naruto the way it did for Naruto, but he did not actually say it could not work for anyone else if they tried to employ it. The results just wouldn't be nearly as broken, even though I'm asserting to you they would still be pretty damn broken. As again, even if we stick to the hard limit of a single clone and stress that she can't keep them out anywhere near as long as Naruto's clones, this would still mean she would have at least double the training time her contemporaries had access to other than Naruto. And meanwhile, options like Kurenai are completely available to Sakura as a temporary sensei, as she would likely have no students in the finals other than Shino, and more importantly, would be able to capitalize on Sakura's highly acute chakra control, and by association, her untapped genjutsu affinity because of that chakra control, all of a sudden giving Sakura a brand new way to fight and weaponize her chakra alongside her added shadow clone jutsu and increased base stats. And again, she's getting at the very least a couple of extra days, or maybe even 2 whole months to train instead of a single one. At the same time, genjutsu requires chakra control training to a higher degree, so it is also likely that she would also engage in more of it, further refining her control and making herself more efficient in how she uses her chakra, and therefore more powerful and less wasteful with it. And still all 100% pre-time skip and before her Medic training under Asani. Speaking of, that should also be mentioned, since Tsunade is a large reason as to why we're lowballing Sakura in the first place, and especially her chakra reserves. As another common misconception being overplayed is the case made by some that Sakura would likely never gain the chakra needed to pull off even a few shadow clones, as this is blatantly untrue, since we know most of Tsunade's jutsu and taijutsu which she passed on to Sakura were way above C and B rank, as evidenced by the Rasengan being the tool Jiraiya and Naruto used to get her attention, for example. And beyond that, many of Tsunade's techniques which Sakura uses likely require more or similar chakra and control than regular shadow clone jutsu does. Not to mention that Sakura didn't spend the entirety of her 2.5-year time skip in intense training for her gains, as by the time we meet back up with her, Tsunade isn't actually making her work at anything whatsoever, and she makes no mention of solo training. Also to this point, before the time skip during the exam, Sakura was able to break out of the C-rank mind transfer jutsu with fairly little effort. To be fair, this can be attributed to inner Sakura shenanigans which pretty much never affected the battle ever again after the Ino fight. But that aside, by the logic we've been operating on so far for this discussion, if Ino was strong enough and had enough chakra and control to upcast that jutsu to the B rank to make it hard to break out of, it's possible Sakura may have failed even with inner Sakura. But Ino was unable to, and had to finish the fight on even terms with Sakura despite her really having absolutely nothing other than her academy skills to apply in the fight. Thus, we could conclude Sakura by this point has at least C rank chakra control skills, if not B rank herself, and could therefore apply herself to skills at that level or a single rank above, especially with the help of a master operating at that level, which is exactly what I'm proposing she will be capable of, as it's pretty much what we're shown in canon. And what's more, when it comes to filler, there is more content in the anime to depict how this training went down at a more nitty-gritty level, and it helps strengthen this position, as some of what we're shown is how Tsunade didn't initially focus this training on just Sakura, but instead gravitated towards her naturally when she performed the best out of the young kunoichi she tried to teach medic ninjutsu basics to, as we are shown that she was always an advocate for having as many competent medics as possible, and the thing she was testing students' aptitude with was the A-ranked mystical healing palm jutsu, which that filler also displays Sakura performing with near perfect mastery while she still appears in her pre-time skip look. This would suggest that around the time Sasuke and Naruto had the wherewithal to pull off A-ranked jutsu like Rasengan and Chidori, Sakura Sakura truly wasn't all that far behind them as suspected, as she could use an A-rank jutsu, just not a defensive one. Her skills and sole asset remain to be her chakra control. So arguably, even from the beginning, it's equally likely that Sakura could actually employ much more than a single shadow clone during her training, as there is no need to use a high-level multi-shadow clone jutsu to gain the benefits of the clone training method. Meaning, I don't actually have to lowball Sakura here. She could get way more than just twice or 4 times as strong as her canon counterpart, and it would still be completely within the realm possibility, because that's how broken clone training method actually is. As we're still only talking about the training for the Chunin exams arc, but the consequences of it would bring about power greater than that of Shippuden. Like, Sakura here just gets to take anything she wants from Kurenai and basically become her Shippuden version of herself, but with genjutsu by this point already, as this is still way before achieving and participating in any kind of Metagnin training. Like Naruto and Sasuke, for example, with much more talent and far better teachers, were only able to pick up 1 or 2 techniques during the month of downtime. But if she can simply double her gains over the month, Sakura could at minimum pick up 2 or 4 techniques, since her learning to water walk by this point would be 100% given. Not even to mention the idea that Kakashi claims she would be good at genjutsu as opposed to Naruto, who had to figure out summoning, and Sasuke, who had to learn a second change in chakra nature. Meaning she could spend all this time learning a lot more genjutsu than usual from Kurenai, which could generally be extremely useful in the long run for her here, since genjutsu is 100% based on chakra control and the medium you use to launch it, and those techniques are also able to be strengthened by improved chakra control, meaning the illusion she casts would also be all the more convincing and hard to break oneself out of. Beyond that, with shadow clones, her attack potency by this point in the series would also be heightened beyond her canon counterpart, as now she could easily just lull opponents into illusions and then clobber them alongside her clones, or simply make firing lines for her clones to throw shuriken and kunai directly into the vital points of confused and hallucinating opponents for easy wins or kills. Like Naruto's, the clones would also get stronger and harder to kill themselves as their chakra control grows, and could likely start pulling more complicated things off themselves, like attaching things to their weapons or helping Sakura to set up traps or perform certain jutsu, difficult movements, or taijutsu, since she would have witnessed Naruto doing so by this point as well. Not a full aping of his style, but somewhat adapting shadow clones into what her style would be in this universe. Like in this timeline, she could make her big axes canon by transforming her clones into them, for example, now giving her some better weapons to use for melee attacks and genjutsu techniques. Also, it should be mentioned that while Kurenai didn't teach Hinata how to make it or anything, she is aware of and maybe could even utilize some of the Hyuga clan's secret healing ointment during training, especially if she makes up for her team losing in the exams by having them join in with Sakura for training, or at least just Hinata, since Shino for sure will be excluded, which would, by the way, even if it's only a few members of Team 8, vastly increase her gains by pretty exponential amounts. To be fair, Hinata was injured during this time, but there's still things she could help out with aside from his sparring. And even then, there's still Kiba. Regardless, that concept alone could probably be better explored in a concept like what if Sakura beat Ino, where I'd have more time to sit and really focus on just this idea in this time period. But speaking of Team 8, this also brings up food pills from Kiba, which could help with training and become a valuable weapon in Sakura's arsenal for both combat and support. But this also brings me to the point I really want to make: Sakura's cooking, and by proxy, her medicine or poison/antidote crafting abilities, which could also be vastly enhanced by this training and experience and engaging in it with the clone technique. We know there are techniques and recipes/formulas in the ninja world to craft signature foods or concoctions that have different effects on a person, like the food pills or the Akimichi version of the food pills, for example. There are also just straight up shinobi steroids, and even special poisons and such that have different effects. These things all, for the most part, would draw from some similar concepts of chemical composition, understanding, trial and error, and the ability to follow a recipe. All of which, no matter how bad you are at it, become way easier if you can just make a bunch of copies of yourself to assist you in the making and recording of the data you find. For example, Sakura could now easily, with the time she has while still training, send a clone or two off to say figure out the recipe behind Kiba's food pills, since they are seemingly more edible than any of the ones she ever cooked in the canon during Naruto's training, meaning the ones she does make could later on actually be helpful during Naruto's Rasen Shuriken training, making that even easier as a part of that snowball effect I've been mentioning. Or she could try to learn how to make an ointment for healing like the Hyugas, so if ever caught in a situation like the Force of Death, she can heal her teammates when they're hurt or buff them so they don't get tired, even without actually being a Medicnin by this point. And even when she does become a Medicnin, having these skills and being able to make these tools would be a good way to save her chakra when actually needing to support her team, and just herself, since it's very important for the medic to avoid unnecessary hits and save as much chakra as possible. Sakura could even spend time to meet up with Ino and get her take on some good plants to derive poisons from, since those could also increase the potency of her attacks and mix well with everything else discussed so far, especially genjutsus, since now you could try lulling an even stronger opponent into an illusion to merely give them a slight cut, so the poison slows them down and eventually eventually takes them out, while you and your teammates too weak to face them try to flee. She could also simply snag some of these things from a tool shop with money, mind you. We're not even mentioning the fact that due to how she is, Sakura's growth is so often tied to feeling behind where Sasuke and Naruto are. So if she's already using clones for training and simultaneously learning how to do things like cook or look after her teammates better, she could go and offer them her aid during their training to simultaneously help them out, and maybe do a cheeky bit of spying on what they're trying to advance on. Thus, you could already be planting the seeds for this version of Sakura to have some form of interest and knowledge beforehand about both changes in chakra nature as well as the summoning jutsu, skills which could pretty easily push her even further beyond her canon counterparts, since I'd easily place her on the same level if not easily higher than Kunoichi like Tenten, Tamari, or maybe what I assume Kurosuchi was like during part 1, since the clone training and experience we've discussed so far would also mean a vastly improved battle IQ and mental fortitude compared to the canon counterpart as well. Hell, on top of this, if Sakura arrives early enough, she could witness Kakashi utilizing the 8 inner gates during his own training after having seen Lee do so, which opens up the entire can of worms of Sakura with even budding access to the technique, which alone is a story-breaking concept, with no real need to include shadow clone training in the equation. In fact, Sakura should probably by this point just be compared to her male peers, since her next real opponent on account of the exam finals likely being uneven and having a wild card if she got through would likely end up being Gaara in some ways, since the Leaf Crush would likely kick off before said wild card match anyway. But first off, with better chakra control, Team 7 are just never caught the genjutsu in the first place, making them quicker to act. Second off, when Sakura catches up to Gaara and Sasuke, she's initially able to throw hands and actually would be able to do quite a lot. Like for one, as Naruto did, if not one better, she could put clones both of the shadow variety and the regular intangible genjutsu variety between her and Gaara, which would be much more effective while he's going berserk to kind of draw his aggro. Then she could also employ things like genjutsu, since Jinchuriki aren't as resistant to them when they aren't fully realized and in harmony with their tailed beasts. Beyond that, Shukaku and Gaara are actively struggling for control at this point, so it would be feasible to catch both of them in a genjutsu actually. And you could possibly just use one to wake Gaara up, cutting a lot of Shukaku's power off. Thirdly, Sakura could administer some first aid and buffs to Sasuke to keep him in the fight along with his super effective Chidori, quite possibly ending the battle with just the power of a mild team-up. And finally, she could also try to employ poisons or explosives to try and slow down Gaara and tax his natural Jinchuriki healing factor to burn up his chakra faster. And even on top of that, if we entertain at all those concepts about elemental release used by Sakura at this point, or possibly even a summoning contract, whether it be to Katsuyu or even a subcontract to a weaker creature, it would still become quite useful here, since overall, I legitimately think the Sakura of this verse will be fully capable of defeating Gaara, and I'm talking one-on-one. Especially if she receives help from Sasuke, and definitely if she gets any aid from a stronger version of Naruto who would arrive to the battle even faster. Sakura then wouldn't really have any training or a real opponent for the rest of part 1 other than arguably Sasuke if he decides to leave here. But if anything, he would be even more incentivized to learn Shadow Clone training method himself, since that would be a more proven method to make the weak strong as opposed to the curse mark. In fact, here he likely would have never gotten a chance to even use it. But even if Sasuke did try to leave the village, this version of Sakura would not only have the intuition to sense that he's doing so, she would legitimately just have the strength and power to stop him all on her own, just because her chakra control would likely be so much better than his, and she'd have a myriad of tools, weapons, and techniques to challenge him with. And even if she didn't have the necessary power to just knock Sasuke out, she would at least have what it takes to make the act of getting away from her be so much harder for Sasuke that their scuffle would draw attention and make his leaving the village far harder, as someone else could join the fray, truly making all her part 1 training so far pay fully off, and in the process freeing this chakra control focused Shadow Clone training method using Naruto to continue snowballing his path right on to the greatest, most powerful Hokage and pretty much shinobi ever, since he just won't need to worry about Sasuke. By the way, Sakura would only around this time meet Tsunade, who would then have a better base to train her up from and a far easier time teaching her every single thing she knows, and therefore allowing Sakura to experiment and make tons of her own new techniques and progress, since as we discussed last time, her 2.5-year time skip worth of training could now become anything from 5 years to 25 plus years worth of training if she utilized only a single or 10 or so clones, which by this point 100% she will be able to pull off, meaning we're talking about a Sakura who could likely be surpassing her Boruto era canon counterpart before the time she is even promoted to a Chunin at age 14. We're not even discussing some of the truly wild theory crafting about how all her expertise could be experimented with and further evolved by further clone training, and applying concepts like looking left and looking right at the same time to things like nature releases, genjutsu, medical ninjutsu, cooking ninjutsu, weapons, and poisons, and a mixture of these things. This script is already way too long, and I'm actually starting to lose my voice a bit, as I could get far farther into concepts of things this version of Sakura could reasonably pull off, but I will quickfire them at you, like making a version of the Akimichi food pills that could work for any shinobi, or a combination of techniques and releases like water-style Mystic Palm Jutsu to make poison extraction and healing easier via direct control of osmosis, or a medical genjutsu that the caster uses to possibly see an accurate image of something that they don't have the equipment for, like an x-ray or a map of the chakra network. And we definitely do not have the time to get into the broadly interesting topic of how it would work when infusing one's taijutsu with different nature releases, along with monster strength. But just off the top of my head, using Earth Style as a kind of trimmer/seismic sense to avoid the need to look at a Sharingan builder, for example. Again, making Sasuke easier to pursue and catch here if he does escape. Or maybe mixing the illusionary nature of yin release into taijutsu to make your feints and fake out attacks more effective. And not to mention further, the Sakura in this verse would probably be pretty instantly ready chakra and control wise to begin storing chakra in her own 100 healing seal as soon as she meets Tsunade, in fact. Which, even though it wouldn't benefit from the accelerated hours put into her training through the clone training method, her overall use of the seal and all her other techniques, both canonical and proposed for this hypothetical, would all be far more effective here, and would likely have upcasted versions which border on the higher ranks of ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. This is why I chose to focus on Sakura next, and help stress just what I mean by how game-breaking this concept is applied to just Naruto at any earlier or more fleshed out point in the series, let alone letting anybody else get even a crumb of it. And the issue would still remain, as even if there were other antagonists and stuff using the ability like Sakura is, well, Naruto would still be at the top of the verse, having snowballed his way all the way up there, and he would be able to take them out anyway. So again, there just aren't any stakes. As all things considered, I was pretty realistic and conservative with how this could go. Nevertheless, this goes to show with the use of the Shadow Clone training method, not only do you make Sakura into the ultimate successor of Tsunade far, far sooner, but you would put her in a position to also sooner surpass her master and begin defining and creating her own genius level advancements with all her many skills and their different applications to go for the higher title of the greatest kunoichi in history, as this Sakura would be very hard to ignore by gods like Kaguya. However, the key to it all would forever be Sakura's skill in chakra control and the Shadow Clone Jutsu taught to her by her friend. That said, as for all the ways the clone training method could break the story, and how learning and using it early isn't well suited for narrative whatevery, I believe we will need to save all of that for the next part, focusing on Mr. Sasuke Uchiha. So please stay tuned for that one and the finale, as we're halfway done now, which will focus on what if Kakashi created and used the Shadow Clone training method for himself, as I'm very excited for both. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to support my content, consider joining me and my supporters on Patreon, becoming a channel member, or commissioning me for a video like this. Or you could just hit like and share and leave a comment, as those are great ways to help out as well. And if you're on mobile, hit the hype button, as those are all completely free and still helpful ways to push the channel forward in the algorithm. With the prior two routes done, it's now time to shift our attention to how the Shadow Clone training method could possibly interact with and affect Sasuke Uchiha. Full disclosure, the way we go about this third route doesn't necessarily matter all that much, as with Sasuke being the other main character of the series, we're kinda spoiled for choice of places in the timeline he could implement different methods of training. For example, Sasuke picking up use of Shadow Clones and using them for training around the time Naruto in this universe learns it with say Jiraiya during his summoning or Rasengan training, still being way earlier than in canon. Simultaneously, we could simply call this exploration of Sasuke being the one to clock Naruto using it during the tree climbing training, as we established with Sakura last time, all the whole demon wind bomb technique portion of the conversation, since that could just save a great deal of time. Another one just as good though is pre the Chunin exam finals training, since he's literally training with the guy who invented the method for Naruto in canon. So if Kakashi chose to help Sasuke be more versatile rather than just teach him Chidori, that could be a method or even just a way to get Chidori faster and some other benefits both intended and unintended. In the end though, all these options present different fun ways for Sasuke to break the story the same way we've just done with Sakura and Naruto. The truly most interesting thing to address before we really get into the topic of Sasuke and clone training though, is how the Sharingan can affect a person's training and growth in Naruto, as one of my favorite comments from last part was that very idea and speculation, looking at the feats of characters like Kakashi, Sasuke, Itachi, and Madara, and what they're capable of just because of their intellect and cunning playing very well with their ability to keenly observe and copy the techniques of others alone. It most certainly shouldn't be over or understated how useful just a regular Sharingan can be for a ninja, due to both the precog and the copying, since outside of combat, it's a perfect ability for espionage and intelligence gathering as well. Even so, I think the Sharingan itself and any training methods around it still kinda pale in comparison to what can be done with Shadow Clone training, especially when it's performed at its highest ranks. However, both have certain levels to them, as in my opinion, the Sharingan is never really used to its full extent for growth and training the way it could have been. To illustrate this a bit quicker than I've been gushing on these kinds of topics so far in this series, the prescience method utilized by Kakashi and Koji and Boruto could theoretically be somewhat approximated by a jutsu like the Tsukuyomi. Of course, this is a fairly taxing jutsu on any Uchiha, but the fact that it dilates time and can even expose someone to extremely vivid illusions of alternate timelines and realms means that one probably could use it for some means of, say, image or concept training, such as we've seen in other battle manga like Dragon Ball. However, typically, the Sharingan's power is specified in its precognitive abilities and its copy abilities, which either aren't always 100% useful or aren't always utilized to their full extent, since in most fights, you will usually only have a chance to use a couple of jutsu rather than say 1,000 plus, for example, meaning a massive library of techniques like Kakashi has is better for increasing the versatility of a ninja rather than outright their strength alone. As again, I don't believe this is 100% the best way to use the Sharingan in training. It is a good use of it, but not the highest realms one could go. Even so, this concept of the Sharingan's basic uses for increasing the prowess of a ninja still helps to strengthen my position on just how broken Shadow Clone training is alone, and especially how broken it could be on other characters, as when considering characters like Sasuke and Kakashi, this now opens the ability to mix the use of the Shadow Clones and the Sharingan in one's training, which as we will get into further later on, could be extremely useful and game-breaking on its own right. Saving time with the tree walking exercise route, we will continue viewing just how differently things could get simply with the use of Shadow Clones during the chakra control training done for the rematch with Zabuza and Haku, as this is also where Sasuke gets full control of his Sharingan for the first time, and begins to have some use of it. And once again with this setup, as I've said twice before, you would probably change the entire story of Naruto, since I think directly after the Land of Waves, your Naruto and Sasuke here would be a bit too strong for the plot to occur as it did in canon. Just looking at his own abilities on the source material, Sasuke increased the efficiency of his use of chakra enough to be praised by Zabuza and Haku during this fight, and even pulled off techniques like a simple body flicker for example, adding it to his repertoire, which for a Genin is already noted to be rather impressive across his above average taijutsu, ninjutsu, bukijutsu, and affinity for stuff like strategy and assassination techniques. Though just like we spoke about with the version of Naruto at this point, being able to multiply the magnitude and mastery of his current skill, even a small bit, could very easily open some interesting routes for Sasuke as well. For example, he would also be capable of doing everything I suggested Naruto could with the Demon Wind Bomb jutsu, just flat out. Or better yet for this situation, the body flicker he debuts against Haku could be evolved a bit further, since taking on Haku is after all a battle of speed, and increasing the control of chakra makes the effectiveness of basic techniques like the body flicker way better. On top of this, Sasuke does remember Shisui, and what he was famous for, as he had witnessed he and Itachi train a few times. Thus, if Sasuke were to, as I argued for Sakura on a low ball, simply double the experience gains of his chakra control training, he could likely weigh more than double the effectiveness of things like his body flicker, making it more efficient on chakra use, and thus capable to be mixed or comboed with other techniques that pull on the chakra. And by that measure, Sasuke is already familiar with the changes in chakra nature by this point, which would now also get better and stronger due to his chakra control. So as I hinted at last time, it opens the conversation of what could be done when adding changes in chakra nature to purely physical techniques. Ultimately, the major benefit for all of this would be that fire style jutsu themselves will likely be a lot more effective and consistent across the series, and especially when used by Sasuke. But overall, what do you think happens if someone were to change the nature of the chakra they used to amp themselves with? For example, what would a fire style body flicker jutsu be like? The simple conclusion is that it's a body flicker done through the medium of flame, and thus is capable of more easily drawing attention while the shinobi moves away, or even maybe lightly burning the target like an attack. I could even see a jutsu like this having an effect that leaves a bit of fire or sparks and embers behind in a trail to disincentivize enemies from following after the caster. That would cut into the jutsu's stealth abilities, but would simultaneously increase its use in combat, and it could always be used for misdirection. Or as posed earlier, what happens if you make the chakra you are enhancing your physical movements with, like your taijutsu, change in its nature for example? Could Sasuke pull off something like a fire punch, or even just generate significant amounts of heat so his intercepting fist taijutsu does a bit of extra damage for example, when countering or catching enemy attacks? Going with my idea posed last time of yin release taijutsu making feints and fake attacks easier, could Sasuke not theoretically generate generate enough heat to cause mirages and mirror that effect, mixing yin and fire release into your physical attacks to make a kind of shimmering mirage fist changing chakra nature plus taijutsu style. Even if all Sasuke could manage is a rudimentary version of something like Shisui and Itachi's Uchiha style Halo dance, for example, Sasuke would still be placing himself at this point way ahead of its canon counterpart, and better yet, would already be naturally loading himself out with a great deal of techniques that would be extremely useful both against Haku and Zabuza, but also just further down the line, and especially against other Uchiha, which would be very enticing to Sasuke. And this is all before he starts using his Sharingan really. It should also be mentioned that like with Sakura, even a single shadow clone could be pretty crucial for Sasuke in melee or close quarters combat situations, since he very often gets overwhelmed, especially in earlier parts of the story. It might be a little silly and out of reach for him currently, but with his genius, enough chakra, and control, Sasuke could in essence become a master of pack tactics, second likely to only Naruto. Like imagine him rolling up on Itachi with say 20 versions of himself, and while they're not as strong as the original, there's certainly something to be said for the kind of chaos 20 Sasuke is with all 5 releases each could bring to the battlefield, while he could also increase and decrease the number of clones on the field to meet his strength needs versus the swarm/diversionary needs, since those could be any kind of clone from earth to fire, lightning, etc., also allowing Sasuke to manipulate the battlefield and its conditions in countless different ways. And thus, the snowball begins to roll again, since now this means that Sasuke would do better in the bridge fight, and thus would stay conscious longer, allowing him to observe more of the battle with his newly awakened Sharingan, which therefore means a chance to copy any and all jutsu or techniques displayed by Zabuza, Haku, or even Kakashi during the fight. One of the biggest pickups from this would obviously be witnessing more of Haku's moves, even though his Kekkei Genkai means the vast majority of them can't be directly copied or adapted simply. Regardless, this would still be pretty big, as even something as small as picking up single-handed jutsu weaving early could be massive for Sasuke. And beyond that, Zabuza has no Kekkei Genkai, and many of his kenjutsu and assassination techniques would be wildly useful for Sasuke, even if some of them would require a change in nature to water to directly use them. Things such as the silent killing would still be a perfect pickup though, and this also brings up the true way to make training with the Sharingan, and especially doing so with clones, truly broken, using the time dilation and copy ability to adapt a jutsu you otherwise couldn't use into ones you can use. For instance, as it is, Sasuke couldn't use Zabuza's hidden miss jutsu plus silent killing combination, because even if he copied both techniques, he could only pull off the one that doesn't require water release until he learns the change in nature to water. That said, if he perfectly understands the mechanics behind the jutsu, and what its components, form, and the amount of chakra needed, and what the end goal is, then theoretically at least, it should be possible to copy the vast majority of ninjutsu, and then adapt them to be done in a way you can do so, even if you say you don't have all 5 chakra releases, or a Kekkei Genkai. Continuing with the hidden miss silent killing technique, that wouldn't work sure, but if you still pull off the kenjutsu, stealth, and assassination techniques, but find something else to hide in than miss, such as smoke and fire, then the jutsu would still work, the major differences being mildly different secondary effects and a slightly altered method to perform it. And this is exactly what we see with Madara's fire style hiding in ash and dust technique, which is virtually the same thing, just fiery, so you would assume it's possible for the jutsu to burn or hurt the target with smoke inhalation, rather than say the effect of the hidden miss style doing things like making you more susceptible to damage by lightning chakra, or making it harder to keep a grip on your weapon or solid stance to the ground you're holding. And what's better, this could likely be replicated with say a sand or dust storm, thunderstorm, or tornado to hide in when using the jutsu with earth, lightning, or wind release. So before we even have the conversation of stuff like novel Sasuke eventually having the feat of figuring out how to mimic the effects of Kekkei Genkai but very precisely using the separate chakra natures that make them up, we need to first think about stuff like Sasuke copying the seemingly unusable jutsu of ice release, and then through the use of the Sharingan and the brokenness that is clone training, saying, nah, I'll snag that and find a way to use it myself. Like Haku's 1000 flying ice/water needles of death jutsu could just be twisted into a fire style technique, and then Sasuke could use it in the exact same way pretty much. The difference just being that fire is far harder to condense enough to impale an enemy with it like ice is, at least until you unlock them on Gekyo and the black flames of Amaterasu. Or even crazier, trying to literally mirror concepts like the demonic ice mirror jutsu, which could be extremely tricky, but theoretically not at all impossible. And if Sasuke did pick it up, it'd be a major boon to his arsenal. Like reconsider my idea of using the heat of fire release to make mirages, and possibly mix that in with the genjutsu style clone, or simply genjutsu itself in general, as well as maybe the use of a shadow clone or two and the body flicker jutsu. Mixing those techniques together with very careful chakra control could pretty much directly adapt Haku's signature jutsu, and the events of watching more of the battle with Haku and Naruto, and later Zabuza, instead of being unconscious for the latter half of it, could push Sasuke to try to increase his physical stamina, strength, and speed with hopes of matching or surpassing the true hidden power of Haku, since he got to see far more of it, which Naruto would also likely attempt to do so as well in this timeline, meaning Sasuke could reasonably be faster than in canon and also boasting a new repertoire of custom fire style jutsu and weapon techniques or buki jutsu, all born from the ice release and assassination mastery of Haku and Zabuza, and all before we even get into the Chunin exams, thus making the exams far easier for Sasuke and giving him more power to work with before he begins training again. Speaking of the exams, like I mentioned with Sakura, it's possible this Sasuke will be difficult to either get the curse mark on, or at least to attempt him with its power, since if he can trap Orochimaru in a demonic heat mirage dome and hold him off with a clone or something, it's highly possible Team 7 could simply retreat or even steal Orochimaru's scroll before doing so, and proceeding to complete the Forest of Death. Then Sasuke would have an easier time in his prelim battle, because he'd be able to use jutsu and he'd be stronger, forcing him to exert himself far less to get a spot in the finals, and now setting himself up with a month of training he can directly multiply, just as I insinuated with Naruto and Sakura. And we're already asserting him as a bootleg version of Haku, who could be very comparable due to trying to adapt his jutsu, and because of no curse mark, now he would have witnessed more techniques by the other preliminary fighters, and he could then begin attempting to adapt those as well, which somehow sounds more disgusting than the idea of Sasuke using silent killing in a version of hidden mist jutsu. Just to name off a few, he could still very likely devise his Lion's Barrage taijutsu, even if he isn't forced to not use his ninjutsu against Yoroi and his chakra absorption jutsu, since Kiba and Naruto's fight would likely still be very taijutsu focused, and could still result in a version of the Uzumaki Barrage being debuted more than likely. If nothing else, at least we'd see a clone body slam here. Or Sasuke could snag concepts from Kiba and the Inuzuka, since his main target at the time is Itachi, meaning there is more incentive to learn ways of fighting and perceiving things that don't rely on his sight. Thus, copying the Inuzuka's chakra enhancement of the sense of smell is completely sound for the quest to get revenge against Itachi. By the way, this idea also brings up the fact that the Sharingan could also be used against Yoroi to precog his movements and make the fight against him easier, which would in turn mean that Yoroi's chakra absorption jutsu could be copied by Sasuke's Sharingan, which alone as a concept is extremely crazy, as it would mean that Sasuke can just basically use either Samihara or the Predator Path in one of his hands, or maybe even through his weapons, since with his Sharingan he can literally see the flow of chakra better than Yoroi can, so he'd be way better at using the jutsu than he ever was, aside from the fact that he is just unfathomably stronger than him. That alone is fairly game breaking, even before we get into ideas like watching and adapting other things you're getting to witness, like the clan techniques of the Ino Shikacho trio for example, since the Nara clan abilities of using the mental energies of Yin release to manipulate shadows would mix extremely well with the Uchiha's fire style, as one of the weaknesses of the Nara's shadow techniques are that they can't be done in complete darkness, but that's not an issue if you can generate your own light sources like flames. Beyond that, Yamanaka skills will be extremely useful when adapted to Uchiha style Yin release techniques, and if nothing else, generating giant limbs like fists or golems of flame or lightning in order to mimic Akimishi techniques is not only wicked sick, but also good practice to eventually wield a Susanoo, especially since most Sharingan wielders never get a Mangekyo, thus presenting a Mangekyo safe substitute that doesn't endanger the eyes. I will also admit that I'm rather partial to this kind of setup with Nara and Uchiha abilities specifically, since if you've seen my Hinata on Team 7 What If, where Sasuke finds power in the Shinigami for example rather than Orochimaru, then you probably get where I'm going with this, as that idea and build of Sasuke even directly informed an NPC I made for my Naruto D&D campaign, being a kind of ninja version of the Grim Reaper, whose lineage is partially Nara clan for use of the shadows, and partially Kaguya clan for the use of the macabre stuff or stuff like bones and death, in conjunction with fire and earth release for that feeling of the unstoppable otherworldly fire and brimstone ninja. Aside from this, Sasuke could also witness the use of the 8 gates and Gaara's sand defense, or even 2 drastically different styles and takes of using Hyuga's gentle fist style Jaijutsu, which is just a technique that utilizes changes in chakra form and sometimes nature in conjunction with the use of taijutsu techniques, and even Kekkei Genkai. So all that stuff about like fire style body flicker and stuff like that, Sasuke could now get way better at it by just watching Neji. Or just imagine mixing the intercepting fist with the gentle fist to make a style of taijutsu that is perfectly suited to counter other taijutsus and also wear down the opponent through systematically attacking their chakra points. There's also the techniques shown off by Tenten and Tamari that can be usefully snagged and twisted by Sasuke as well, or even the techniques used by the Sound Team. However, many of them took either special tools or even in the case of Zaku, surgical intervention to replicate. Still, again with the Sharingan mixed with Shadow Clone training method, nothing has to be directly copied, just adapted in a way that Sasuke could use it, which he likely could come to do in some way or another since these are all just sound-based techniques for the most part, and that's not extremely impossible impossible to replicate. Beyond this, because Sasuke would be pushing himself and his chakra reserves a lot more, he'd have far more chakra than in canon to utilize and continue growing stronger with a lot earlier. In fact, he'd be able to pick up his change to lightning nature a lot sooner and possibly even pick up more than just that, such as his Chidori variants for sure, or hell, maybe even his Kirin jutsu extremely early on the timeline. To that extent, as we discussed with Naruto, Sasuke could also invent more jutsu like Kirin, such as a fire style version, as he presumably just needs to cause a forest fire to make use of it. That is to say, it really is a crazy amount of strength he could gain in a short time. In fact, still lowballing him, Sasuke would now have at least 2 months compared to the regular one for his Chunin exams training, allowing him to learn stuff on top of the Chidori, and further improving his physical abilities and taijutsu skill to match Rock Lee's, and likely his speed to match Haku's, since now he could steal anyone's back he's just witnessed and could keep going on and advancing further, since like with the Sakura route, his odds of leaving the village drop drastically low in this timeline, as I doubt this version of Sasuke would be so devastatingly embarrassed by Itachi's return or set off by Naruto's growth, since he'd understand it a bit more and will be growing rather comparably as well. Maybe even doing well enough that when Itachi and Kisame reappear, he doesn't need healing by Tsunade, and instead accompanies Naruto and Jiraiya to find her, making that task easier and still giving Sasuke a form of training under Asani. However, this route of the story likely wouldn't differ in ways that are all too significantly different from my What If Naruto Won early Super Mini, which if you've enjoyed this series so far, you should probably go check that out as well after this, since you'll probably enjoy that too. To continue expanding into how quickly and how strong Sasuke would get using only a couple of clones during his training, by the time we move into the Shippuden era, he would theoretically have even more chakra than his canon counterparts, more than likely enough for far more than a single clone, meaning he could now be more than doubling his gains. Even if we go with the idea that I personally disagree with by some fans, which is that Sasuke at his strongest by the Boruto era only has enough chakra for 10 clones or so, that's actually more than enough to make Sasuke a literal god, since like I said, that virtually turns the time skip from 2.5 years into a 25-year time skip, making it more than reasonably possible for characters in the Shippuden era to far surpass their canon counterparts and strongest versions of themselves that we've seen in the Boruto era. And keep in mind that Sasuke spent most of that time in canon traveling and exploring more of the ninja world, experiencing and witnessing more with his Sharingan, which led to his further growth. So how would a concept like that interact with Shadow Clone training? Since I've discussed how I don't want to step into the realm of another Super Mini, but by this point, Sasuke could just as easily spend his time skip with Naruto and Jiraiya, traveling the world and training. Meaning here, both reincarnations of Indra and Ashura would benefit from the passive use of each other's superior Shadow Clone training method and Sharingan clone training method. Or even if he stayed in the Leaf and didn't personally travel, if Sasuke were to dispatch some clones to just wander the world, especially the major nations copying jutsus while having some others work on learning elemental releases back in Konoha, he could easily end up learning water, air, and earth release by the end of the time skip, achieving what took Hiruzen Sarutobi a lifetime to do, and got him so much renown in only a few short years, as Sasuke would then have full mastery of the base 5 natures, and a bunch of jutsu from each, either copied from the strongest practitioners in the world of those elements, or devised or adapted into a format that better suits Sasuke Uchiha and his ambitions, all while still having like 20-ish years worth of training to capitalize on, but still squeezed down into a period of time that's less than 3 years. Speaking of the Sarutobi clan, by the way, from which one of his past ninjas Sasuke was named after, they're another good reason for Sasuke to remain in the village in this timeline, as they are, after all, considered second only to the Uchiha in their mastery of fire style jutsu, and they have a great many techniques like the Shuriken Shadow Clone jutsu and the Flying Swallow due to the age and the well-traveled nature of the clan. We know that they know a lot and they're very good teachers. And Sasuke using some higher level Sarutobi techniques, like the Summon Animal Weapon Transformation Augmentation Jutsu, would be extremely sick, with either Garuda, Aoda, or even both with his actual sword if you wanted to get really disgusting and pull off some 3-sword style crossed with Devil Fruit imbued weapon techniques a la One Piece. Overall, I think Sasuke would be more open to Kakashi's training, especially if in this route, he's still the originator of the training method and points out that Sasuke could still benefit from it even to a lesser extent, though he could also use that to his advantage in a way, by remaining in the village to train with the method, that he may have lost out on somewhat by going with Orochimaru, or even if he did, he could more quickly learn all he wanted to from the Sonic before turning on him faster than in canon. This would also mean Sasuke's training here would be far healthier, and with the support system of Sakura, who if we continue using this as a continuation for her part of this series, will be a far better kunoichi and partner for him to lean on here. And Kakashi, who here would sooner become a peer Sasuke can grow alongside, rather than a mentor territory he has to feel stifled by, since with both the clones and the Sharingan, he really wouldn't be losing out on all that much by not having Orochimaru as his master during this time. And to that extent, as I said, the Sharingan isn't used to its full potential for training, since Sasuke could arguably make an illusionary version of Orochimaru based off his psychological profile and the experience and information Sasuke has on him to make a fake Orochimaru to coach him in training, meaning even the stuff that Kakashi couldn't teach Sasuke as well as Orochimaru could, like a Genjutsu for example, Sasuke could still pick up. And vice versa, Sasuke spending this time with Kakashi developing his Sharingan could lead to even more developments for Kakashi, though we'll say that for the final part focus on Kakashi to really dig into further and really break your brains and the story with how insanely, stupidly, brokenly powerful some of these characters could get by abusing these mechanics. Oh, I'm also not going to spend a ton of time elaborating on it further from here, but when this Sasuke with a better understanding of stuff like ninja basics and how useful chakra control is, along with all the time and effort he can put into his training with his hacks methods, Sasuke could essentially turn all his swordplay and Genjutsu into something akin to the breathing techniques from Demon Slayer, except the elemental effects that are simply visual flourishes in that series would actually be real tangible phenomena here, and Sasuke would be able to get rather good at these things too extremely quickly. Just imagine Sasuke pulling off a Hinokami Kagura for example, or Thunderclap and Flash. Or, for instance, the Leaf Village has a Genjutsu technique used by Hayate Gecko and Yuga Uzuki, called the Dance of the Crescent Moon, which reminds me of Kokushibo's moon breathing, arguing the question of what someone enhanced by chakra in the Sharingan could do with such techniques. Also, speaking of Leaf Genjutsu techniques, are you familiar with my What If Zabuza Survive story? Because if not, let me introduce you to a version of Sasuke possibly using the Helmet Splitter Jutsu, basically a Naruto version of the Getsuga Tensho. And with his mastery and experimentation, Sasuke could push that technique further than it's even pushed in that story, possibly imbuing the Helmet Splitter with all kinds of different elements, for example, like lightning style, infernal style, and probably even his faux ice style. Slash it once with lightning style, see it paralyzed and maybe even critically sliced, slash again with Amaterasu to wipe out what's left, and then slash again with ice release to freeze anything that survives that, so there aren't any regeneration or substitution shenanigans. This is why Sasuke kinda overproves why Shadow Clone training is so broken, because he overtly doesn't need it to get much stronger than he did in canon, since it would enable him to do pretty much everything Orochimaru or even his Mangekyo Awakening were able to do for him, except just pretty much for free. As I said, even if Sasuke can't make a ton of clones, he can use that limitation to allow his clones to take in a greater amount of more complex information than Naruto used his clones for. Meaning, for example, any remaining texts or scrolls left by Sasuke's Uchiha forefathers that remained in village custody would therefore be his to browse over at his leisure, while simultaneously really ingraining the information they all hold. Or he could simply do this regular jutsu, as I've been describing, and again, any technique of the 1,000+ Kakashi is willing to teach him would be at his disposal, along with opportunities to increase his number of chakra releases and how large his chakra reserves are, and then how fine and acute his control of that overall chakra is. For a taste at an even crazier concept of things that could be done with the Sharingan, we've also seen his power implanted in another non-Uchiha before, which in the grand scheme of things is never really explained mechanically, but does propose a lot of interesting implications for its use in stuff like surveillance, support, or assassination, for example. Like, could Sasuke not theoretically utilize that ability alongside his clones for training and combat? Basically, implanting illusionary clones that maintain the data and experience transfer of shadow clones, but don't actually require the use of enough chakra to physically manifest them. Kinda ghost clones, if you will. This concept could especially be done, in my opinion, if Sasuke closely investigated Yamanaka and Leaf Village interrogation abilities and techniques, basically allowing Sasuke to turn enemies and allies alike into likely unknowing carriers of a kind of virus, a mental copy of Sasuke he could dispel whenever he wanted, after allowing that clone to scour the target's mind and spirit for all their valuable knowledge. And the trigger for launching this technique could literally just be a glance from the Sharingan. Theoretically, it's all completely sound, and doing it this way, Sasuke wouldn't need to launch massive amounts of clones to power up and train with. Using only a few on a strong or willing and skilled target would lead to massive amounts of valuable intel, experience, and possible techniques that Sasuke can adapt into its own or the Uchiha style. To more plainly spell it out and again save some more time, since I hopefully don't need to keep hammering home how broken this could be anymore, with the use of Shadow Clone training method, and especially using it with his Sharingan, Sasuke feels like Madara in his own right a lot sooner, and he'd surpass Madara a lot sooner as well. And to be clear, we're still only focused focusing on nature and form changes in training, which compared to things like sealing and genjutsu aren't as complex a field. That said, we won't go too much further on this one since it again steps on the toes of another super mini I've already done before, but it really should be considered how things like this kind of training proposed could affect Sasuke when using things like the Susanoo or his pseudo-elemental Kekkei Genkai, since the versatility and craziness of the things he could pull off are why I maintain that this just isn't really great for a narrative story, as there just isn't a lot you could do to challenge him. But now that we're done with our penultimate part focusing on Sasuke, and with it devastatingly clear how Shadow Clone training, even when watered down, can turn anyone into a near god of shinobi, we're going to try this one last time focusing mostly on Kakashi. However, he won't be all we talk about, so please be sure to stay tuned for that last part. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to support my content, consider joining me on Patreon, become a channel member, or commissioning me for a video like this one. Or you can hit the like, share, and hype buttons for completely free and still help the channel a lot, like these generous souls whose names you see scrolling across the screen currently. Until next time, that'll be all from me, so take care of yourselves and the world around you. Go beyond plus ultra as always, and I'll see you next time. Believe it. It's time for the finale route, the true ultimate story breaker. What happens if the Shadow Clone training method is thought of and implemented early, like before Naruto even learned Shadow Clone Jutsu itself, way before it? What if Kakashi both invented and personally tested the Shadow Clone training method, or even thought or learned of it as a result of someone else thinking and implementing it early as a consequence? In general, the point is that Kakashi would still likely be the inventor, and this way, we can focus on him to close out. But any high-level Shadow Clone user with enough brains could likely still think it up, and that describes a few characters from Kakashi's org, who in hindsight likely also should have known about clone training as a concept early, or at the very least, gave thought to abusing Shadow Clones more often, such as Minato, the third Hokage, or Jiraiya. Though Kakashi thinking it up during the aftermath of the Nine-Tails attack could make a great deal of sense to me, but I do recognize there are certainly other points in the timeline to do so. My favorite part about this period, though, is that it could launch a great many Kakashi-focused what-ifs all on its own, since I've had several of these on my to-do docket for far too long. Like, what if Kakashi or Minato learned of the masked man's identity early? What if Kakashi learned the flying Raijin? What if Kakashi trained to attain Sage Mode? What if Jiraiya or Hiruzen trained Kakashi? What if Kakashi went undercover with Itachi? What if Kakashi adopted Naruto and or Sasuke after the massacre? And honestly many more that are probably all best saved for their own dedicated stories to really explore in-depthly, instead of miss or underusing these concepts and treating them as mere set dressing and notches on the belt for this topic that's ill-fitted for a real narrative. Lots of these could also overlap with any setting where Kakashi is further motivated to not stagnate due to depression and loneliness, during the time that takes place between the passing of his friends and teachers, and his making the transition to becoming a teacher in his own right. It should also be noted that this stagnation from Kakashi is what I would argue is the true overarching factor that led to his inability to use or abuse the Shadow Clone training method, among a few other things. Since we know, number one, Kakashi himself declares and admits that he allowed himself to get rusty during this time, which is overtly the most major factor in my, as remember, even the point at which he specifies that he doesn't have much chakra left, and so used illusionary clones to fill in the gaps for his version of the multi-Shadow Clone Jutsu. That's actually a far rustier and weaker version of Kakashi than the one who expresses to Naruto that he's never used and likely could never use the clone training method, as it's just not optimal for him to split his own chakra off, and he couldn't hold it for long if he even tried. But this is only partially true, as further displayed by canon, since later on, we see Kakashi pull off a myriad of feats that prior versions of him throughout the series were completely unable to, such as spamming the lightning blade, comboing it with Shadow Clones to perform the lightning cable, and even changing its form further to mirror the animation of living creatures. And when going even further beyond that, he began combining the lightning blade jutsu with the Mangekyo Sharingan and the Susanoo, when previously back in part 1, just using 4 Raikiri in a single day would have left him with pretty massively severe chakra exhaustion because of the required chakra for the S-Ring jutsu, but also the required use of the base Sharingan. While in part 2, when he's also expanded his amount of custom jutsu, Kakashi is able to average at least 6 or 7 lightning blade in a day, meaning almost doubling his output in a little over 2.5 years, because he simply got off his ass more and was more motivated, having students now counting on him that he didn't want to disappoint or fail any further. Which leads me into point number 2. Sasuke's advancement with the Chidori in such a short time lends credence to to the idea that Kakashi also lost a great deal of his own ambitions when he fell into his slump, simply because the lightning blade did not advance, which, to be fair, he more than likely did associate a great deal of trauma with the technique after Rin, and ironically, a lot of what happened to Obito may not have ever happened had Kakashi never had the technique in the first place. But that is overtly another what if for another time and place. My point regardless still stands that beyond advancing the Chidori into the lightning blade, Kakashi stagnated with his signature technique for quite a while, and by Guy's words and tones about the technique as well during the tuning exams, as well as what we later came to learn about its origins being devised by Kakashi when he was under the tutelage of Minato, as a means to rival, combat, and overcome the Rasengan. I was always under the impression that Kakashi actually placed a great deal of logical pride and importance on the technique. But based on the advancements and variations Sasuke was able to derive out of the base jutsu, including evolving it into multiple S-rank techniques like the lightning blades classed as, I think it's fair to say that Kakashi going through his endgame Thor arc so early in the series cut a lot of what he could have been doing short. For example, the lightning release violet bolt or purple lightning jutsu he would eventually derive as a replacement for the lightning blade after losing his Sharingan. A jutsu which by its description and what we've been shown is about as powerful as a lightning blade, but just as versatile as a Chidori, being used in ways that pretty much perfectly mimic the actual lightning cutter, but simultaneously have the properties of the Chidori stream, the Chidori true spear, the Chidori katana, and even aspects of the Kirin jutsu. While on top of all this, the fact that the purple lightning jutsu overtly doesn't require the Sharingan means that it is also lower in chakra cost and therefore is more efficient to use. And beyond that, we're just offering Kakashi a way to use the element he is naturally the strongest in a lot more often and with another technique created by him. Finally, the number 3 reason why Kakashi couldn't use the clone training method, as he devised it for Naruto, a combination of rustiness and the lack of ambition, alongside the idea that he didn't have enough chakra, and that his Sharingan was basically acting as a parasite for it. Kakashi stopped trying to exceed his limits and trying to tap into his true potential, a sin a shonen battle manga protag mentor like Yami would frown strongly upon. Speaking seriously though, Kakashi's canonical increase in his limits and chakra reserves over the course of the time skip is after all one of our main points of proof that the chakra reserves can be increased, and that suffering and surviving chakra exhaustion probably leads to more drastic expansion of those reserves, as opposed to not going through. And this combined with the fact that chakra control is a near limitless internal resource, which can be cultivated by a ninja easier than more chakra can be generated in fact. And with that cultivated control, the use of the overall chakra gets better and more efficient, which we can logically reason is how some of Kakashi's later feats come about, as a combination of a lot of the prior factors we've been discussing so far slowly being confronted and resolved as we've delved further into the war. Beyond this, it should just very heavily be mentioned that just like we've talked about with Sakura, Sasuke, and Naruto, these characters have well and truly always had this potential in them. It's often just been a factor of having multiple roadblocks and issues of time and means. Kakashi especially has always had this kind of proposed potential in him, as it's not often discussed enough, but he deserves to be in the conversation for some of the top nepo babies of the series. As for better or worse, Sakumo Hideki passed down a lot for Kakashi to inherit, both his strengths and his struggles. Granted, it's not always guaranteed that the potential of a parent in this world directly means that the child will surpass them, but Kakashi literally does it in canon, and the vast majority of offspring that are main characters we've seen in the franchise indeed do get stronger than their parents, sometimes combined, and we don't even really know Kakashi's mother very well. Regardless of her though, Sakumo was a ninja overtly stated more powerful than the legendary Sannin as a whole after all, putting him in conversations with characters like Prime Hanzo, Hiruzen Sarutobi, or even theoretically Nagato or the Paths of Pain. And personally, I won't be subscribing to any readings of his achievements or statements as fraudulent or not until we get that proposed Sakumo one-shot along the lines of the Minato one we received in 2023, since Sakumo's name was pretty high among the poll for possible characters for that, and we may have another one at some point. Thus, keeping in mind how wildly the Minato one-shot shifted a lot of perspectives of the power scale and sheer potential of Minato himself, I am still heavily looking forward to a day when Sakumo's clout is followed up upon, even if it is just to call him a fraud, by the way. Thus, I will argue for Kakashi in this series just as I have everyone else, as I generally think he is also capable of using a low-level version of the clone training method that, while couldn't be held as long as Naruto's or pushed as intensely, even then I believe would fairly easily break the story, since just per its base requirements, with the shadow clone training method, Kakashi would primarily always be working to improve his chakra reserves, which are already under fairly constant strain, and as a result we see how much they already increased from the beginning of the series to the end of the war. Thus, it would strongly imply that any further increases and exertions earlier would be of phenomenal and beneficial use, and could change quite a few things on its own, as it would lead to that growth of the amount of chakra Kakashi has, and his ability to control it constantly. It should also be noted as a potential benefit for Kakashi, and also just a lot of characters in the series, that shadow clones could be used to go to therapy or counseling. Like, talk therapy is just that. talking, and sessions of it don't last all too long, so it is wholly possible to attempt to manifest clones to experience the possible breakthroughs of a very enlightening and comforting discussion, and then dispel that clone to absorb those experiences into the main body, or simply to better pursue hobbies or socialize, since those things are necessary for reducing stress as well, and could simply ensure that a ninja has a life, and thus something they don't want to lose, will cause them to train harder and fight longer. As if nothing else, Kakashi with enough control and mastery of the Shadow Clones could binge the Makeout Tactics series, or just any other books he wanted to read. Not saying any of this is a magical depression cure by any means, but it 100% would be a viable way to make getting the necessary help to deal with difficult things a lot easier, which is always nice. And no, this is not an ad read. Number 2 though, Kakashi could work to master any technique or investigate anything he really wanted to with the clone method, and in genuinely any of the multiple ways we've discussed in the prior parts of this series so far, but during this time set far before those discussed as well. As better yet, he would have around a solid 10 to 13 years before the results of this training would really be directly necessary, which as a concept should really break your brain, because put into context with some quick math, the hard-argued Sakura limit of a single clone doubling experience gains means that period is now 20 to 26 years. The argued Sasuke limit of 10 clones means that the period is 100 to 130, and if we entertain speculating just how many of the clones in the multi-shadow clone Kakashi version were actually solid, or even just take the over 2 dozen shown on the panel and on a highball say that Kakashi's max amount of clones would be around 25 or so eventually, then that would mean that Kakashi can expand that little decade he has before he really needs to get stronger for the plot to an unbelievable 250 to 325 years, meaning he'd essentially experience more in that time than Mamoru Uchiha did over the course of his entire life by about 2 or 3 times. A statement which by all reasonable measures would suggest I can end the video here, but even though it now sounds like we're describing Otsutsuki, I'm not going to, because if you actually think about it, Madara actually spent a decent hunk of that time hooked up to the Ghetto statue in a cave with a box of Zetsus. So in actuality, because Kakashi will be traveling on missions with the Sharingan active, as we discussed with Sasuke, and simply the concept of training his mind and body, like we discussed with Sakura, Kakashi would truly be experiencing at least 4 to 6 times everything Madara got to do, see, and study. This is also not taking into account that the time between these years would also lead to the growth of chakra and the reserves, meaning more clones could be generated and benefited from. So this kind of growth would legitimately be the lowball, as it's not unreasonable to approach these speculative numbers with a logarithmic or exponential curve, simply due to the nature of the different methods of abusable training that can be utilized alongside the Shadow Clone method we've discussed in this series. Put simply, even using Naruto's 1K multi-Shadow Clone method would actually be in the average, rather than the lowball, since that level of chakra becomes theoretically possible, even if that means a whopping 10,000 to 13,000 years of training for this hypothetical Kakashi between the Nine Tails attack and the formation of his Team 7. Like as another quick one that, as mentioned at the top, could also be its own what if, Kakashi could also seek the tutelage of his master's master and his master's master's master in order to train with Hiruzen and Jiraiya, since as we discussed in the Naruto portion of the story, doing so would mean vastly cutting his required training time for different jutsu and high-level techniques, as he'd be training with the professor and one of the world's foremost sealing and sage art researchers and experts, allowing these great minds of the ninja world to collaborate on these theories and discoveries Kakashi could be making at this time to fully revolutionize the shinobi training program of the League, as they'd be exploring a more extensive amount of ideas and concepts than Orochimaru or Madara could ever hope to. Think of things like my proposed Nine Tails initiative from my Leaf Village training problem discussion video, for example. Training 6, 7, or even 100 times harder and longer than Mamoru Uchiha ever did, even just theoretically, means Kakashi could show off a mastery or evolution of any of his massive jutsu library to a degree we overtly wouldn't see until the 2 Blue Vortex era, as more and more characters begin to take advantage of the prescience method in order to even the odds against the divine tree people, or even shunjutsu wielding gods existing on higher dimensional planes, meaning Kakashi could be mastering near shunjutsu level versions of his techniques from all over the world, and then put multiple centuries worth of time into learning more complicated arts, or furthering his understanding of the ones he already has, like sealing for instance, which he likely would be inclined to get exceedingly better at after what happened to Ren, and especially if he refused to fall into a slump after. And the things that one can do with seals are just truly crazy. Off the top of my head, Kakashi could craft a seal to safely shut off and turn back on his Sharingan, eliminating his biggest source of chakra inefficiency completely. That alone literally breaks the story, and could be its own interesting what if, honestly. easily. Or Kakashi could make a seal that would basically scan and then locate the other Sharingan to make tracking Obito exceedingly easy. Hell, if we operate on him not knowing Obito is alive, Kakashi could accidentally kill or even greatly wound and impede Obito by making a very strong reverse summoning seal for that other eye of his, which to Kakashi would have been buried with Obito, bringing it to himself now in hopes of it not having yet decomposed completely, or simply to recover Obito's body out of respect. Meaning through multiple ways, Kakashi could also end up with the dual Sharingan early, and also through sealing, possibly even create a way to make them not only permanent, but also able to be toggled on and off with a seal. That means Kakashi is able to go into the Kami dimension, and able to weaponize it early as well. Or, another way Kakashi could do the same things, or even add to those developments by stacking them, learning Sage Mode, be it a Dog Sage Mode, or White Fang Sage Mode, what have you. The benefits regardless are too good to pass up on, especially with all this time you have to capitalize on, since on top of being a top tier boost of just about every part of a ninja's faculties, the Sharingan could always be fueled by nature chakra instead of Kakashi's own, further reducing chakra strain, and the regenerative boost of Sage Mode could also help to stave off the negative effects of overuse of the Mangekyo, providing a longer period of time before EMS must be achieved to avoid blindness. Though even if that did happen to this Kakashi, his other senses could get stronger as a result, and he would find ways to compensate. Also, by the way, Sage Mode Susanoo, or as an alternate, since there's always often the suggested Susanoo body armor, Kakashi could copy and adapt the hidden and ultimate techniques of the Izuno clan, for example, to produce a technique akin to the Cat Cloak or Cat God Possession Monster Cat Beckoning, shifting them into a White Fang Cloak or Dog God Possession Thunder Beast Beckoning Jutsu, which would allow him to don a small cloak of chakra in order to adapt and enhance himself with certain aspects of Kana, or even summon a large chakra avatar maybe shaped like a Raiju, or the Zenogre from Monster Hunter, for example. This therefore means Kakashi could now be taking his multiple centuries to master his likely tens of thousands of jutsus and turn them into sage arts, that at some point would begin to border on becoming shunjutsu. With the time he would have on his hands as well, Kakashi could also spend the time scanning and copying Kekkei Genkai orders for jutsu, and then adapting and transforming the ones he couldn't use, as proposed with Sasuke, but to a much greater and more refined degree likely. In fact, Kakashi would probably become the world's most foremost leading expert on Kekkei Genkai, as well as changes and mixtures in chakra natures, since in a way, that is what his canon legacy nearly was. As we said, the copying aspect of the Sharingan just didn't get used all that. With multiple, or even tens of centuries to study, Kakashi could rework everything that's currently known about the Kekkei Genkai, possibly pulling off incredible feats like discovering what the theoretical mixture of wind and earth release is. By the way, if it was up to me, that'd be what dust released is, not this nonsense. Or, Kakashi could make something like the fan concept of the elemental Kekkei Genkai chart, and fill it out in a reasonable and thoroughly explored way that fixes a few of my personal issues with it maybe. Like for example, inventing a special set of Kekkei Genkai, which come about from a shinobi having double inherited a strong affinity for the same chakra nature. So like maybe a wind x wind affinity could give a flight release, or a water x water a slip or friction release that acts kinda like Alvida's Devil Fruit from One Piece, while something like yin x yin could be a straight up ESP release, and yang x yang could be a myriad of things, since it's just described as energy a lot of the time, and is commonly used in sage arts. I think you could actually classify it as what nature chakra is by definition, or you could go the route that it's what we know of as raw chakra or life energy in this world, essentially being something that's much more common for regular people with no understanding of the little chakra they have. Or maybe the animals of the world, since they're generally better at a lot of ninja arts than humans. This kind of classification and series of Kekkei Genkai is also where I would personally put something like a radiation, mutation, or evolution release, since yang is also often associated with augmenting and changing the body, or imbuing other things found in nature like the environment with the characteristics of life and controlling them like a high-level puppet master, a la some of Kabuto's abilities, that somewhat border on alchemy, which if pushed and further explored, could be its own school or release of chakra in itself, a tree of lifestyle if you will. In general, the possibilities with this concept are also fairly endless, as I could probably make a whole nother what-if theory crafting and discussion lecture series, just on Naruto's different elemental nature releases in Kekkei Genkai, and how underexplored they too have been. Yet my proposal remains that this version of Kakashi could explore and abuse those unknown depths as well, just as we only lightly suggested with Sasuke, but to a much higher degree here. Thus, put very overtly, this would be a Kakashi who could easily handle Zabuza and Haku on his own, a Kakashi who could probably scare, chase off, and even defeat Orochimaru, preventing him from ever interfering with the Chunin exams or killing the third Hokage, much less getting into Sasuke's head, a Kakashi who could beat Itachi and his Tsukuyomi, and probably bring him home for his Sasuke, so there's no coma, or realistic reason reason to even have a Sasuke retrieval. And even then, if there was, this is the Kakashi who could arrive at the Valley of the End with time to spare to defeat the Sound Five, minimize or completely eliminate the injury sustained for the young ninja sent on the mission, and successfully retrieve Sasuke, or any other target for retrieval, or even extermination without issue, because it'd probably just be a team of 1 to 5 Kakashi clones, low diffing one of the best arcs of the franchise. This is a proposed Kakashi who could easily catch Deidara, deal with Kakuzu and Hidan in a 2v1, and then Nagato in the Paths of Pains in a 1v6, along with a myriad of other things, because much like Naruto, it's just hard to give this character any more aura than he already has without him just becoming a god, literally. And as strong as Kakashi got by the end of the war with the dual Sharingan, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Kakashi, if he was allowed to abuse Shadow Clone training, could put himself well on the way to becoming the next sage of 6 paths. There's a multitude of characters who could claim the same if they abused the method as well, mind you. Still, Kakashi is the technical inventor, and my favorite character, so he of course got the finale part, and a decent bit of my time yapping to get glazed. But as a little bonus, we're gonna end out our glazing on Kakashi's possible use of the Shadow Clone training method, expanding to that multitude of characters I mentioned. Without trying to step on the toes of my What If Naruto Characters Were Reborn series of shorts, let's give but a small glimpse into crazy things say the rest of the Konoha 12, and a couple of significant ninja connected to them, could achieve by trying to utilize Shadow Clone training as best they can, in conjunction with their other skills and methods of getting stronger. I may even throw in a few extras and villains to be nice. Let's start with a very interesting one, Rock Lee, because at first glance, he shouldn't be able to make any use of the clone training method. But keep in mind, Guy, who was 120% devoted to Lee's training, actually could. Guy is fully capable of ninjutsu. He just doesn't favor it over his Kage levels of physical strength and conditioning culminated through his training on top of his mental and spiritual fortitude, which combined to mean he also has large amounts of chakra and control of that chakra, with which he can use to enhance his body and techniques further, including taijutsu, much like Lee does. And he is capable of expressing chakra control in simple forms, such as water and tree walking, meaning Guy could make use of the clone training method to a minor degree as argued for anybody else, and pass those benefits on to his students. And while this seemingly would not be directly useful for Lee, this would mean an easier way to learn any of the proposed physical or taijutsu-focused techniques we've so far mentioned, as well as increasing the effectiveness of new and old techniques in and out of combat, and by exponential factors. For example, a taijutsu with a change in chakra nature is not an ninjutsu, it'd be an elemental taijutsu, and therefore, this training could theoretically be used to do things like teach Lee to enhance his Konoha whirlwind and hot wind techniques with the power of wind and fire release, or giving him access to the elemental forms of the body flicker we discussed with Sasuke, or even something akin to chakra modes, since results like that could possibly exist through enhancing oneself with elemental chakra to get different effects, like for example, lightning chakra enhancing one's perception and reaction speed, or earth chakra enhancing the weight or density behind an attack or a guard. Clone training could also be used to further practice and hone a greater abundance of different taijutsu, kenjutsu, and bukijutsu styles, even over time copying or imitating them from other practitioners akin to the Sharingan, meaning Guy and Lee could know even more fighting styles than they canonically do, which is a crazy concept to consider, as that alone would invent new powerful techniques in its own endless snowballing effect, as shown by their canon development already. Next, we have Neji, as clone training offers some similar propositions, like enhancing the sacred gentle fist techniques, with radically different and stronger changes in form and nature, allowing the invention of theoretical concepts like a water-style rotation, or an actual wind-style air pump, for example. Mixing an elemental release with the Byakugan is also intriguing, as doing concepts like affecting your perception of the stunning blows of taijutsu with lightning chakra would be incredibly useful for Neji, even if it does go against tradition to iterate too much on the gentle fist, as there is only so much you could do before you begin to vastly expand it, and a story like this one very heavily encourages experimentation and mass collaboration for the sake of seeing how crazy things can get. Also incredibly useful for Neji, just like anyone else, would be the ability to throw physical clones at his opponents, in order to overwhelm them with superior numbers and fighting technique. But again, that will go for everyone except Lee. If nothing else though, and much better, if up to at least 3 shadow clones are formed, which I think Neji should be able to pull off, especially by endgame in this story. It would enable him as a single Hyuga to use the proposed Hyuga's massive combo fist team ultimate jutsu from Ultimate Ninja Storm 4. As it involves 4 Hyuga using high-level mastery of their gentle fist techniques in conjunction to assault the enemy, with a collaborative 8 trigram 64 palms, rotations, and even air palms. And the best part of the massive combo fist being performed by clones is that it will be done in perfect sync, and it will be done without the surprise of Hayashi arriving late. Neji could also further evolve the massive combo fist, and even better step into the role of his father, and then surpass him in one fell swoop, by teaching this to platoons of Hyuga ninja, in order to make use of during the war, and massive 4x4 more grids, essentially making an infinite chain of having the chakra points assaulted and then being blown away endlessly until whatever you're targeting is critically injured, robbed of chakra and stamina completely, and likely too far away to become a threat ever again, as the Hyuga would officially discover a bit of their true unified power and potential to truly rival the Uchiha's legendary might. And as proposed with Sakura, and the idea of a genjutsu or maybe a seal, which mirrors the effects of a Hyuga's Kekkei Genkai to see the chakra network on non-Byakugan building allies, that would mean that Neji could also spend the time and effort teaching the taijutsu to Team 3, giving them yet another extremely powerful ultimate move, and making that and any other 4-man combat cell that Neji was ever a part of all the more dangerous. Tenten, first off, she can multiply her screen time, but aside from that, learning chakra natures and implementing them would be useful to her, as she mostly uses weapons in Mukijutsu, meaning increasing the cutting power, weight, or being able to detonate her weapons with the force of wind, earth, and fire release would make Tenten a far stronger fighter altogether. While at it, she could also pick up puppet master techniques to essentially make her weapons almost living or haunted ones, allowing her to effectively animate her own weapons as their clones or puppets, becoming far harder to dodge or block and far more devastating when they hit. And beyond even this, it also means that Tenten could make shadow clones, which just means increasing her firepower. As if nothing else, she could always steal the concepts we devised for Naruto's Super Demon Wind Bomb, or even perfect the Twin Rising Dragons technique into one she can effect like the Shuriken Shadow Clone or Super Shuriken Shadow Clone, trapping opponents in an infinite twisting helix of giant weapon sealing scrolls, all endlessly bombing the target with effectively unlimited ammunition, which could then be further affected and manipulated by the chakra of the user. Moving to Kiba, like Kakashi, picking up Sage Mode would be wise for him, as he always has a companion summoned into the fight. Not to mention, the slightly increased healing of nature chakra would be super useful to Kiba, turning him into a chakra-enhanced ninja version of Marble Sabretooth, or Beast Essential. Aside from this, elemental release would also do him a lot of good, and just in general, we've seen his desire to become capable of a multi-shadow clone jutsu, which would theoretically allow him to keep pulling off more massive dark fusion jutsu, along with more intense Inuzuka-style taijutsu barrages, since everything that we propose in the realm of physical techniques will be fully possible for Kiba as well, and could even be further enhanced in power by the use of the claws and fangs of man-beast mimicry, allowing for theoretical concepts like a jutsu akin to Inuyasha's Iron Reaver's Soul Stealer, but of all different kinds of elements, or even just with basic chakra. Clone training itself, and clone chakra control training, would also mean Kiba's base strength and his senses would become even more acute and his precision and control of them as well. Or, as proposed with Sakura, he could use the time to experiment and make more effective and safe food pills for himself and Akamaru's. Or, just as interestingly, Kiba could also spend this time with the clone training breeding and training his own personal pack of super ninja hounds, which could then theoretically themselves participate in shadow clone training, allowing him to put Kakashi's and any other ninja animals to shame. Hinata is really the same as Neji mostly though. I could also see her really abusing shadow clone training to not only catch up to Naruto, which in this timeline alone is a very crazy concept, but she would also use it to do key supportive things for him and her other friends, like learning to heal and master medical ninjutsu, or maybe make shinobi cooking recipes that aid in development and training, as suggested with Sakura. This could also work incredibly well for Hinata if she furthered her medical knowledge, since through Tsunade and Kabuto's short bout, we know a competent medic can affect things in a target's body, or even change them seemingly forever, meaning Hinata could do massive internal damage, and in a very crazy diamond-like manner, fix it, but in a way that will only lead to greater damage and discomfort, or maybe even confusion, or even the opposite, leaving an opponent feeling such physical bliss they're unable to be a threat any further. Either way, Hinata will be able to straight up poke a single chakra point, and then completely rewire her target's nervous system, or even attempt to do so with an army of herself, or anything else we suggested in the Neji section. Hell, she could probably just straight up energy bend somebody's chakra away permanently if she got as strong as we're proposing here. Shino with the shadow clone training method is literally and figuratively disgusting to think about. As is the fact that of the Konoha 12, he is arguably one of the people who could be pulling the clone training off the easiest, since he is already able to make solid clones using his insects, and could probably derive a subform of shadow clone by mixing it with insect clones, which as an idea itself brings up the fact that Shino can communicate and share information with his insects, so it bears the idea of having members of his colony transform into him, and then train alongside them, before allowing Shino to log entire colonies of insects worth of data and experience. And you would only need to hold this for so long, as bugs only live so long anyway, and they can literally drain chakra away from targets, meaning they theoretically can't run out. They could also be planted on them to gather their intel and techniques, for example, or maybe even to parasitically control them to do his bidding, like an even higher form of the Sharingan parasite idea we discussed with Sasuke. Ino could expand her repertoire of jutsu massively, maybe even inventing the brand new Yamanaka clan jutsu derived from the mind transmission technique, which in the canon timeline will be developed by a future version of Inojin Yamanaka, from another timeline and taught to Inojin by Kashin Koji thanks to prescience. Ino could also further experiment and enhance her own techniques, learn to counter or maybe even conjure things like Inner Sakura to do her own bidding, or maybe even casting elemental mental jutsu that works somewhat like genjutsu, but will be much harder to shake off, scaling the elemental effects and pain of a technique onto a target's mind, like using fire-style mind transfer or a ninpo, poisonous mind transfer, making targets wholeheartedly believe they will suffer excruciating third-degree burns, or the effects of a debilitating toxin for the rest of their lives, allowing Ino to essentially seal post-traumatic stresses into opponents that never actually occurred. Shikamaru could vastly expand his chakra reserves and also increase his firepower, which is just about all he would need, since the very idea of allowing Shikamaru to have more than one brain thinking about solutions for the same issue alone is pretty daunting, and could be truly devastating for enemies even if the task left Shikamaru sometimes too tired to fight himself. Even just getting strong enough to always use the shadow imitation for very broken things would be a wild shift for Shikamaru in the power scale. Choji could instantly master his full power, and then gain immense confidence and self-esteem along with the firepower of clones themselves. From there, he could take cues from ninjas like Asuma or Jirobo to pick up a nature release and then increase his attack potency, but simultaneously, going the route lightly suggested for Sasuke and attempting to learn some kind of chakra absorption technique would also be enough to break Choji as a character and the plot, essentially turning Choji into Android 19, as he'd be extremely hard to actually tire out and put down, or even harm with chakra-based techniques, since he could simultaneously enhance his size, and therefore both the surface area and the strength of whatever he is using to drain a target's chakra from, making Choji get bigger while you get smaller, until you're nothing more than a chakraless heap on the ground easily stepped on, allowing Choji to just grab another opponent like a potato chip and eat it. Tamari could probably become the strongest natural wind style user there is in the series, or she could deepen her connection with the Kamentachi summon contract to try and find a boss or S-class summon beast from it. And even if one didn't exist, as suggested with Kakashi, Tamari could invent herself another boon by either discovering or inventing a Kamentachi Sage mode, or maybe even picking up puppet master or sealing techniques from her brothers. Kankuro would be surpassing Sasori far sooner, and likely would even be able to invent his own signature form of puppeteer jutsu, likely derived from experiencing this universe's tuning exams with Sasuke and his Dragon Fire jutsu, since it's a technique that utilizes ninja wire and strong changes in chakra nature in order to direct powerful flames into trapped opponents, opening the realm of mixing elemental releases with chakra threads to basically make Kankuro into the Naruto world's version of Doflamingo, even when he isn't using his puppets, which he would also therefore be able to multiply by shadow cloning. Or he could theoretically begin using giant puppets like 5-meter long Chinese dragons, or maybe even just massive mechas, piloting them all in perfect sync with maybe 5 Kankuro clones or so. Just imagine how dope it would be for Kankuro to form Voltrons or Megazords out of his puppets. He could then use a technique like Dofi's chromatic string if he learned all 5 changes in chakra nature and made each string in the slash empowered with a different chakra nature. Gaara with his siblings, if you notice, are among the only originally villains I've suggested making use of the clone training method, and that is mostly just because Naruto and his allies would pretty constantly act as an equalizer against anyone else who tried to take advantage of the clone method, as they would simply be growing too strong too fast, easily up to and even beyond this world's Boruto era, as I've kept harping on. Thus, even if this was a souped up version of Gaara during the Leaf Crush plan, maybe even with perfect control or harmony with Shukaku in order to establish his own Shukaku chakra mode, or maybe even full mastery over Magnum release and his energy with Shunjutsu, or even that proposed Earth and Wind release Kekkei, it's still fully likely that Gaara wouldn't actually be able to stop Naruto, unless it were uniquely a world where Naruto was not using the clone training method while Gaara was. While in contrast, super heavy hitters like Hitachi or Nagato, attempting to use the clone training method while not getting any kind of superior medical attention they were unable to in canon, would probably just end up dying before they could reap the major benefits of this training, excluding learning to do something like Orochimaru did, and just turning themselves into body-hopping demons pretty much. While someone like Kisame or Kakuzu could theoretically also be able to abuse the training method, it would be nowhere near to an extent like Naruto could, hence why the balance is always just unfairly shifted towards his position in most cases. While on the other hand, someone like Orochimaru making use of it would probably just turn him good earlier, since it'd be an easier way to achieve his goals than anything else he really went about. Obito is arguably the most interesting concept you could explore, as him exploiting shadow clone training like Kakashi could easily change the entire series, both in an idealized direction, or even one that simply leads to his and Madara's overall success. Just much easier and without a lot of stakes, even though I feel that may also be worth its own exploration, even if done as another overview discussion style what if more so than a narrative, since much like this one, it's just the worst possible outcome explored to an excessive extent. And even then, I decided to spare you all more yapping about how this means the Boruto and Kawaki of this early clone training timeline would be inheriting this version of Naruto and Sasuke as their masters. and because of that, they'd be kind of immune to any forms of nerfing or sidelining by the plot, on account of the fact that they would just narratively be too strong, and would therefore never really be taken out over the course of the time skip. Meaning Naruto and Sasuke will probably be training the two Karma Warriors up together, using the clone training method, even eventually using the clone training method alongside the Prescience method with Kaji and Koji, learning every technique any of their alternate timeline cells have ever devised or perfected, and then snagging them to make use of earlier, and then involving them even further, all accelerated by the ability to dilate time and compound experience gains through clone training. That said, I would love to know just how broken you think your favorite characters could get while using clone training, or even the Prescience method, or maybe even both, since this video is getting super long and I didn't get a chance to mention them here, or maybe didn't ramble or yap on long enough or insanely enough for the ones that I did get to mention that you really wanted to hear about. Like for example, I'm sure someone would have liked to hear me go in further on Tamari, or maybe even mention characters like Daruo, Fu, or Hayate or something, and I simply didn't have time for that either. But if you have ideas or even just want to comment and ask me my ideas, please do so, as you never know, it may inspire me to one day approach those ideas or concepts of the story in a style you want, or maybe just as side parts of a different story. This, however, will finally bring this mini-series to a close, and thus my insane ramblings on this absolutely cracked and insane but no less fun topic can also finally come to an end. I genuinely want to thank you very much for watching this mini-series throughout its uploads, or even all the way to the very end if you're watching the compilation of the series later in the future. I also want to once again thank Obito for commissioning this topic, as narrative what if or not, I have had a great deal of fun tearing into and exploring it, as well as discussing and even arguing the different ideas and possibilities with you all. If you'd like to support my content, consider joining me on Patreon, becoming a channel member, or commissioning me for a video like this. Or you can just hit the like, share, or hype buttons for completely free, and you will still be helping out the channel a whole lot, like these generous souls whose names you see scrolling across the screen currently. Until next time, that'll be all from me, so take care of yourselves and the world around you, go beyond plus ultra, and as always, I'll see you next time, believe it.